Chapter 51. Notes. Chapter text March 7, 1997. Dear Ron, hope that the enchanted windows in St. Mungo's are as sunny as it is here. I'm not a Quidditch player, and even I thought it looked like a beautiful day for flying. We welcomed 2 new members to the cooking club this week. A first-year Slytherin named Richard Thorne and Owen's best friend from Hufflepuff, Alina Bradstone. We haven't told them about our scrapbook, but I think it's great having younger members join up. It really feels like our new club might stick around, you know. Hope you're doing well. Kevin, March 10, 1997. Dear Ron, I found this editorial in the Daily Prophet today and thought you'd like it. Hope you're feeling all right. Love, Hannah, March 13, 1997. Hey Ron, here are some pictures of Gryffindor's last practice before the game. The team looks great. I'm sure we'll kick Hufflepuff's butt on Friday. I'll take pictures of the match and tape them in tomorrow. Hopefully that way, you can feel like you were really there with us. Colin, March 15, 1997. Dear Ron, we lost. It was all Cormac McLagan's fault. In the middle of the game, he tried lecturing the other players about their flying and such. When he stole Jimmy Peake's speeder bat and tried to show him how to use it properly, Harry flew over to confront him, only for McLagan to accidentally whack a bludger right into his face and knock him out cold. Fortunately, Ginny was close enough that she was able to catch Harry before he fell, and she and Demelza helped him to the ground. The final score was 320-60. Harry's okay, fortunately, but he's stuck in the hospital wing for a few days, and he's understandably furious. I am too. After the game, the rest of the Gryffindor team gave McLagan what for, tearing into him about how he lost them the match, and he should quit before Harry has to forcibly kick him off. McLagan tried to argue, but you would have been so proud of Ginny. She didn't take any of it. She said that the least he could have done is try to fill your shoes, given that he was only ever your replacement. But from the start, he failed to live up to you in every conceivable fashion, let alone be a decent Quidditch player. I probably wouldn't have called him an entitled, obnoxious wanker with dicks for brains, like she did, but otherwise I quite agreed with her. You also probably would have loved Luna's commentary, though she did frequently go way far afield. At one point, she spent 10 whole minutes rambling about how one of the players had something called loser's lurgy. Fortunately, as Ginny reminded me, not all hope is lost. The totals still give Gryffindor a slim chance at the Quidditch Cup, as long as we win with a 300-point lead. And Ginny, Demelza, Dean, and Harry are all good enough to manage that right. It'll be hard, but I'm sure we'll be able to do it. I'm sorry that this letter hasn't come with better news. As always, we miss you so much. Love from Hermione. Dear Ron, I'm sorry about the match. McLagan is a perfect joke of a player, and as far as I'm concerned, he should go flying off into the sun after what he pulled. Here's a little drawing to cheer you up. I think I got McLagan's swollen, oversized head down, though the bludgers hitting him from all sides are a bit too big. What can I say? My sense of proportions was hampered somewhat by how much pain I wanted those balls to inflict. Love, Cho, here are the pictures from the match, as promised. All of Gryffindor House is furious with McLagan. Even Cho told him off when he tried talking to her in the hall afterwards. I couldn't have agreed with her more. I'll send a nicer picture tomorrow, promise. Later, Colin. Dear Ron, I'm really sorry about Gryffindor's loss. The whole thing was super unfair. And I know if things had been different, you would have been the keeper Gryffindor needed. Can't say you would have won, of course. You were going up against our team, after all, but I know the match would have been much better if you'd been there. I've sent you a red velvet cake by owl post. We all know that the Arps won't let you have it for a couple of days, but I thought you'd need something sweet to cheer you up. In the meantime, don't worry. There's always next time. Keep your chin up. Kevin. Dear Ron, I've sent you an apple pie too. Hopefully the container Arjuna lent me will keep it warm even if the Arps has to examine it. I know that you can't write back yet, but just know that we're here for you. Love, Hannah. Dear Ron, whenever I'm dealt a horrible blow, I like to revisit this line that Professor Ramsay used in one of his cookbooks. I've had a lot of success. I've had failures, so I learn from the failure. Failure always feels terrible at first, but it's never an ending unless you let it be. Your team can turn this around. And when you're back, then you Gryffindors can try to take down my team a peg or two. Keyword being try. Don't give up. Arjuna, March 16, 1997. I took the liberty of snatching McLagan's potions textbook earlier and modifying it before leaving it on the floor by the Gryffindor table so he could find it. I have no visuals to share, but just imagine the suffocated girlish scream when he opened the book and got a faceful of job and potion for his trouble. You're welcome. And B, there's that nicer picture I promised. I was able to snap this of McLagan after he got the potion to the face. Nice one, Millicent. Cheers. Colin, March 17, 1997. Hey, Ron, to get your mind off the match, here are some pictures from some of my favorite travel magazines. Did you know that Nigeria might have been home to one of the oldest wizard cities in the world? Here are some pictures of the lost city. Nigerian cursebreakers and wizard historians are still excavating it. I just think it'd be so amazing to go there. Get well soon. Owen, March 18, 1997. Dear Ron, Owen's pictures reminded me of a trip mother, father, Astoria, and I once took to Istanbul when we were little. I'll tape pictures in below. I found them in one of my old scrapbooks. If you're wondering why Astoria's hair is so short, it's because she decided to try cutting it herself after seeing Uncle Hyperion shaving and coming to the conclusion that there was no need to have mother and father pay money at a salon when she could cut it herself. Hope you're well. Daphne P.S. from Astoria. I still remember the wonderful smells of jasmine and spices in that bazaar. Unfortunately, I've gotten a lot better at cutting my own hair since then. When I was 7, Mum, Dad, and I celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary by going to Prague. My favorite part was taking a horse-drawn carriage back to the guest house we were renting and seeing a double rainbow as soon as the rain cleared up. Here's a picture for you, Ron. Hopefully the rainbows will brighten up your day. Love, Hannah, I've never been out of the country before, but since we're sharing pictures, here's one of when Dad and I went to the Tower of London. The tower in the picture is where the two little princes were locked up and probably murdered. I love how eerie it is. Also, the crows who live at the tower are all adorable. There was this one that kept posing for me, so I took a good 10 pictures of him. I named him Foe. Zaxaxo, Rose, March 19, 1997. I've never been out of the country either, but Mum and I sometimes take day trips to local sites. Here we are at Westminster Abbey, paying our respects to William Wilberforce. We had just finished reading a book about him at the time. Sorry, I'm not smiling. I just lost my 2 front teeth, so I was feeling a bit self-conscious. Hope you're doing well, Ron. Bridget, March 20, 1997. My dream, at least travel-wise, is to go to New York City. I've been in love with it since I was little. I would love to see a Broadway show, shop for Christmas gifts in Times Square, try an authentic New York-style pizza, and go to the very top of the Empire State Building. Plus, it's the home of the Scamander Magizoological Museum, the largest magical creature museum in the world. Here are some pictures and drawings I've done. It took me a little while to compile all of it together, but I hope you like it. Love, Cho, March 21, 1997. Dear Ron, I found this in my trunk the other day. Figured it'd fit in with everyone else's letters about traveling and bring back some nice memories too. I'll still never forget how excited I was when you first sent me this clipping with my birthday card. See you on Saturday. Harry, you went to Egypt. You're so lucky, Ron. You have to tell me all about the pyramids and the curses and the sphinxes when you get back. Oh, and I remember seeing that article on the front page of the Daily Prophet. It's so strange how young you look there, Ron. You would have only been 12 or 13, right? It looks like it was a really fun trip. Love from Astoria, March 24, 1997. Hi, Ron. Here's a great editorial from the Prophet this morning that made me smile. R.J. Moon has a way with words. The cooking club has 4 more new members. 6th-year Hufflepuff Sophie Roper, Lisa Turpin, and Oliver Rivers and Eloise Midgen, who you probably already know as she's a Gryffindor in your year. Eloise has a particular talent for making crepes. Hope you're doing well. Kevin, March 26, 1997. Dear Ron, I know you're not much of a reader, but I thought this quote was relevant enough to your situation that it might be helpful. It's from a very good Muggle book called The Secret Garden. With one strong, steady push, the chair was inside the secret garden. Colin fell back against his pillow as the wheelchair stopped. He dropped his hands from his eyes and slowly looked around. Vines of green leaves covered the walls like a carpet. Splashes of purple, white, and pink blossoms covered the trees and bushes. Wings fluttered above the boy's head, and the sun gently warmed his thin, young body. A pink glow suddenly spread across his face, and Colin Craven, the boy who was convinced he would die, cried out, "I shall get well, I shall get well, and I shall live forever and ever and ever. Stay strong." Arjuna, March 27, 1997. I remember The Secret Garden. I had to read it for school, though my favorite was Treasure Island. It's a Muggle book too, so you probably wouldn't know it, Ron, but it's really good. It's about a boy named Jim Hawkins who finds a treasure map and sails to an island filled with pirate treasure and goes on an adventure. It's awesome. Cheers. Colin, that sounds cool, Colin. It kind of reminds me a little of the Darren Cursebreaker books. I used to read them a lot as a kid. Did you read any of those, Ron? I've always loved the one where Darren sneaks into the Japanese Ministry of Magic to expose a wicked Kelpie disguised as their minister before it can kill again. Owen, I've only read one of those books, but it was pretty cool. I've always been more into comic books, though, like The Adventures of Martin Miggs, the Mad Muggle, or X-Men. I really love North Star. I was so disappointed when they cancelled the Alpha Fight series. Kevin, March 28, 1997. My favorite book's The Last Unicorn. Here's my favorite part from it. "It's a rare man who is taken for what he truly is," he said. "There is much misjudgment in the world. Now I knew you for a unicorn when I first saw you, and I know that I am your friend. Yet you take me for a clown, or a clod, or a betrayer, and so must I be if you see me so. The magic on you is only magic, and will vanish as soon as you are free, but the enchantment of error that you put on me I must wear forever in your eyes. We're not always what we seem, and hardly ever what we dream. Still I have read, or heard it sung, that unicorns when time was young could tell the difference twixt the two, the false shining and the true, the lips laugh and the hearts rue. Zaxaxo, Rose, Mum and I read The Hobbit a lot when I was little. It's a story about a hobbit, which are these made-up creatures, sort of like a friendly cross between a dwarf and a human basically. Think Professor Flitwick, except with hairy feet, who goes on an adventure with 12 dwarfs and a wizard in order to slay an evil dragon that stole the dwarfs' treasure a long time ago. I always liked the idea of this little guy getting thrown into an adventure, but then really proving himself when he's put in danger. Talk to you later, Ron. Bridget, March 29, 1997. Mother and father didn't give us a lot of books growing up unless they were textbooks, but Uncle Hyperion brought Daphne and me a copy of the original Tales of Beedle the Bard once, and the three of us spent the whole day reading The Fountain of Fair Fortune under the willow tree on the grounds. That one's always been my favorite, even if mother and father always disapproved of it. Love from Astoria. I always preferred the Warlock's Hairy Heart myself. It's dark, yes, but the message is important. Shut your heart away from love long enough, and it becomes monstrous. Hope you're well, Ron. Daphne, March 30, 1997. I love The Fountain of Fair Fortune. Mum, Dad, and I saw a production of it in Hogsmeade once when I was little. It was so pretty. I loved all the magical puppets they used. Ron, you would have loved the night. Dad talked with the production designer after the show, and she said she based his armor on a Quidditch keeper's uniform. Love, Hannah, April 1, 1997. I read the tale of the three brothers over and over as a kid. I think the moral is so important, not to be afraid of death just because it's mysterious. It's something I think Shakespeare tackles beautifully in Hamlet, when Hamlet accepts death with grace, while still pleading his friend to tell his story. Though Babbity Rabbity is a fun read too. Arjuna, I like the morals of the others, but I agree with Astoria and Hannah. I like Fair Fortune best. It has the most interesting and compelling characters, I think, and I always loved the ending. I loved drawing Amata, and the night when I was little, can't find any of my old drawings right now, so I guess I'll just sketch one quickly now. Love, Cho, April 2, 1997. My favorite book has always been Matilda. It's a Muggle story about a very smart little girl who lives with her abusive family and finds true friends when she goes to school, and even ends up discovering that she has a kind of magic, too. I've always related to it a lot, though Matilda's family reminds me a lot of Harry's aunt and uncle. I don't know if it'd be something you'd like, Ron, but the ending where Matilda gets to move into a new house with her kind teacher at the end always made me happy. Hope you're feeling all right. We all really miss you. Love from Hermione, April 6, 1997, Dear Ron. In defense against the dark arts today, Neville showed Snape up by non-verbally disarming Crabbe. Snape didn't give him any points, of course, but he looked so surly about the fact that Neville, of all people, had managed to cast a non-verbal spell before the students from his house. Though he did take the opportunity to rub it in my face, saying that I should have done it months ago if Neville could do it. Neville looked guilty about it, but I frankly don't care. I'm so proud of him. Hope to come visit again this weekend. We'll make sure to come in the morning before your physical therapy session with Jengu. Ginny has told me to tell you not to strain yourself, because you'd look like an idiot injuring yourself even further when you're trying to get better. I wouldn't say that exactly, but please be careful all the same. See you soon. Harry, April 8, 1997, enclosing another great editorial from R.J. Moon. Whoever this person is, they really know how to write. I particularly love this quote. Wisdom is often a trait associated with age, but at present, no adult at the Ministry of Magic has stepped forward to address the growing threat in a meaningful way. There has been plenty of action, of course, but the vast majority of it has been thoughtless and frenetic to the point that the gesture is full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Cheers. Colin, April 10, 1997. Hi, Ron. It's a bit grey outside today, but fortunately things are reasonably cheerful here. The cooking club has 3 new members. First-year Hufflepuff James Tuckett, third-year Slytherin Byron Miller, and Gryffindor second-year Ewan Abercrombie. All of them have great potential, but Ewan in particular reminds me of you. He's a real risk-taker with flavors. Cho's been working on some concepts for a logo for our club. She said she'll sketch them in later so you can see them. I'm sure they'll be great. Kevin, here you go, Ron. These are the logo concepts I've been working on. I particularly like how the last one with the crossed wand and mixing spoon turned out. I also finished this sketch of our 21 club members. It was hard to fit everybody in, so it took a while, but I think it turned out pretty well. Hope it's okay. I put you over on the left with the Slytherins rather than next to Colin. You're just so much taller than him, and I knew I just had to put you and Bridget next to each other. I hope to have a copy inked and colored by the time you get back. Love, Cho, April 12, 1997. Dear Ron, a lot of people are sending in editorials to the Prophet now. The papers started expanding their section, probably to keep up with all the submissions. I'd bet it's largely thanks to Bagnold speaking out. Everyone suddenly feels inspired to speak out too. It's so exciting. I don't want to take up too much room, so here are the best ones. A lot of them are signed with obvious pen names, but judging by his writing style, I think S. Seeker has to be Goodfellow. Hope you like them. Love from Astoria, April 13, 1997. Pansy got in her head to confront Lily Moon for the Daily Prophet's recent editorials. Even if Moon claimed that she doesn't have anything to do with R.J. Moon. Pansy tried to hex her for being a liar, but your sister protected Moon by setting a bat bogey hex on her. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't smiling just a little. And B.I. was smiling more than a little. And I'm sure you are too, right, Ron? Love, Bridget was able to catch this candid shot of Pansy getting hit with Ginny's bat bogey hex. Priceless. Cheers. Colin, April 15, 1997. Mr. Whiskers says hi. I had to take this picture on my bed since Mr. Whiskers is too scared to leave the dorm most of the time. He didn't like the magical camera, though. The smoke startles him. Zaxaxo Rose, April 16, 1997. Hi, Ron. Since we're sharing pet pictures, here's one of my warty friend. Meet Wallace, a.k.a. Wally, a.k.a. Wally Boy, a.k.a. the smartest toad you'll ever meet in your life. He loves to imitate voices he hears by croaking at different octaves. You should hear his attempt at Professor Snape. Hope everything's going okay. Kevin, April 17, 1997. Daphne and I both have eagle owls named Beaumont and Wagtail. Here's a picture of them. Mine's the one on the right that looks like he's smiling. Love from Astoria, April 18, 1997. I have an owl too. Her name is Gwenog, Gwen for short, after Gwenog Jones of the Holyhead Harpies. Here's a picture of when I first got her as a baby. Isn't she cute? Love, Cho, I'd love to get an owl, but Mum and I just can't afford it right now. Hope to buy one after I graduate, though. I've already picked out the perfect name, Caraboss, or Kerry for short. That way the nickname could be for a boy or a girl. Hope you're doing well, Ron. Bridget, April 19, 1997. Hey Ron, here's a picture of my dog. He's a yellow Labrador and his name is Pogo because he likes to jump up and down like he's on a pogo stick. Sometimes he even chases squirrels by trying to jump up into the trees in our yard. It's so funny to watch. I'm not allowed to bring him to school with me, so Mum and Grandma Trudy take care of him when I'm not there. Whenever I come home, he loves to jump up on his back legs and put his front paws on my shoulders like he's giving me a big hug. Hope everything's okay with you. On April 20, 1997, I lost my cat Brie last year, but I think I'll be getting a new one next year when I have the chance to shop around. The Magical Menagerie has a good selection, but I adopted Brie at a smaller pet shelter in Salazar's Grove that was going through hard times, and I prefer to do that again if I can. May as well try to save an animal that wouldn't have a home otherwise than just pick up a normal one that anyone would adopt. Here's an old picture of Brie. It took me a while to track down, since I didn't take many pictures of her. As you can see, she only had one eye. She was that way when I first got her. I got that glass eye for her to protect her eye socket from infection, as well as to stop people from looking at her funny. And B, she was so cute, Millicent. And I love how she keeps looking over at her tail like she's thinking about pouncing on it. Mr. Whiskers is too much of a scaredy cat to even think about chasing his tail. I'm sorry you lost her. Zaxaxo Rose, April 22, 1997. Dear Ron, Katie's back at school. She's completely recovered, though she doesn't remember who gave her the cursed necklace. Still, it's really good to have her back. Once you're back too, then everything will be the way it should be. I planned a team practice for the end of the week so Katie can reorient herself. In the meantime, Dean's agreed to play as keeper during our practices. He's not as good of a keeper as he is a chaser, but he's at least a good placeholder. I've had to tell Ginny to not hit him quite so hard with the quaffle a few times, though. Hermione plans to bring another set of notes on nonverbal spells for our next visit. Fortunately, I was able to persuade her to compress them slightly from the huge stack she'd originally written. Hope you're well. Harry, April 25, 1997. Hi guys. JNGU says I'll be OUT by next week. I can't wait. Ritty back soon. On. Chapter 52. Ron returns. Chapter text. Ron was scheduled to arrive back in Hogsmeade via Portkey on the 2nd of May, just over a week before Gryffindor's final match against Ravenclaw. The healers had decided that a Portkey would be safer than the Flu Network, as Ron was still a little shaky on his feet. An Auror escort would then accompany him back to Hogwarts on foot. Ron finished tucking in his shirt with some difficulty before getting to work on his Gryffindor necktie. The feeling had mostly returned to his hands by now, but he still had trouble separating his fingers so that he could use just one at a time, like if he needed to point at something. His hands and feet would still fall asleep a lot, and occasionally there'd be flares of white-hot pain that would surge through his nerve endings, as if molten metal was flooding to the tips of his fingers. Ron fumbled with his tie, trying to fight it into submission. Unfortunately, his thumb was stuck at its side, and his pointer and ring fingers were both moving in unison rather than separating properly, so he was having trouble knotting the tie without also knotting his arms in the process. Seeing Ron's problem, Jengu walked over and extended his hands. Here, would you like some help? Deflating invisible frustration, Ron dropped his hands. Jengu fastened the red and gold tie around Ron's neck, likely more neatly than Ron ever had in his life. Thanks, mumbled Ron half-heartedly. Jengu offered him a small smile. I know it's frustrating, he said, but just remember how much progress you've made. Just 2 months ago you couldn't even sit up in bed. In 2 more months, who knows? An abrupt shout echoed from the hallway outside. Ron looked up, startled. Amazingly, Jengu didn't even turn around, though his face quickly turned grave. Ron, he said very quietly, whatever you and your friends are up to, I want you to be safe. Do you understand? Ron looked at Jengu in surprise. Jengu's dark, sharp-lidded eyes were very serious, but not at all cold as they bore into Ron's blue. That letter you received from Harry mentioned something about a Project Dumbledore and you were working on. I can only presume it has to do with the Order of the Phoenix. Ron, I'm not stupid, and neither is the Ministry, he added sharply to cut Ron off when he tried to object. Minister's wary of any group working outside his authority, whether they're on his side or not, and I dare say the thought of soldiers with loyalties to anything besides the ministry, especially child soldiers, would terrify him. "We're not children," said Ron before he could stop himself. "Yet you're Dumbledore's soldiers," Jengu shot back. There was a short, tense silence. Jengu glanced over his shoulder as the voices out in the hall started to rise. Then he turned back to Ron, taking a hold of his shoulder. "Ron, I understand your desire to fight," he said lowly, "and believe me, I admire it. I'm fighting for what I believe in, too. All I hope is that you'll be careful. The people you've allied yourself with have put a target on your back as well." "You mean like the people you've allied yourself with?" Ron challenged him. Jengu smiled wryly despite himself. "Right." Ron, however, wasn't smiling. "So you agree within Rouge that we should force Muggles to join an army that we could use against the Death Eaters?" "What Adrian said was taken out of context," said Jengu dismissively. "He may be prone to hyperbole, but he's not a monster. We simply want the Muggles to help us in our fight, and given that Death Eaters hate both us and them, it seems only appropriate that they ally themselves with us." "But what if they don't want to fight?" demanded Ran. Jengu's expression contorted slightly. "Of course they'd want to. The Death Eaters would kill them if they didn't, now wouldn't they? Once they know the scope of the danger they're in, they'll want protection. We could give them that protection if they agreed to fight against our common enemy. So you'll force them to fight or die then," said Ron, his voice rising. "Hold their and their families, lives over their heads, so that they'll fight the Death Eaters for you. Only I shall decide who shall be hired or fired in this establishment," roared a female voice in the hall. Both Ran and Jengu hushed abruptly, their focus turning to the closed door that led to the hallway. Jengu's face went visibly paler, and his grip on Ran's shoulder tightened. Ran looked up at the healer, his blue eyes flickering between judgment and concern. "That's Madame Healer Feverfew, isn't it?" Jengu glanced back at Ran, his dark eyes glinting sadly. "Yes." "The Aura Department has been putting pressure on her lately. They believe that she's harboring political dissidents in her ranks, shielding them from ministry inquiries." "Like you," said Ran. Jengu's black eyes glinted with something more earnest as he turned to face him properly. "Ran, whatever you think about me, I beg you, please be careful. I'm a healer if I knew I was sending you out into the world, only for you to die on the field of battle." For a second, Ran saw another set of eyes in Jengu's place. Brown, framed with freckles and a pair of horn-rimmed glasses, and rippling an insane variation of morality that could sicken even the most grounded and assured of men. The kind of misguided morality that could tear a family apart. Ran choked. The door opened abruptly, and two people entered the room. One was a lightly tanned witch dressed in lime green robes and a matching headscarf, and the other was a tall man dressed in dark scarlet robes with a face and frame that made him resemble a vulture. "Jacques," the witch addressed Jengu in a shaky voice, "Mr. Savage would like to speak with you in my office." Jengu straightened up sharply. His sharp-lidded eyes drifted from the witch over to Savage slowly, before he put on his best attempt at a pleasant smile. "Of course, Madame Healer." He released Ran's shoulder and headed to the door, trying to ignore the nasty glare Savage gave him as he followed him out. Feverfew turned to Ran, her lightly tanned face visibly upset, but trying to smile anyway. "I have your portkey ready, Mr. Weasley," she said kindly. "It'll be ready to take you back to Hogwarts in a minute." Indicating the clock that read 11:59 overhead, she put down an empty flower pot on Ran's side table. Ran tried to smile, but he couldn't help but glance at the door through which Jengu had departed. Feverfew regarded Ran with a sympathetic eye. "You and Jack got along rather well while you were here," she presumed, her words almost sounding like a question, but not quite. Ran nodded. Feverfew considered this for a short, silent moment. Then she returned her focus to Ran. "Did Jack ever mention his politics to you? Did he ever say anything radical?" Ran looked up at Feverfew. Her face looked visibly pale and frightened, like even just asking these questions was doing something incredibly wrong. "No," Ran said at last. "Never." He picked up the portkey, and before Feverfew could ask him anything else, Ran put on his best smile and said, "Well, see you." And with the strike of 12, he disappeared. In a flash, Ran arrived just outside the Three Broomsticks. The familiar smells of butterbeer and ham immediately swirled around his nostrils, making Ran beam widely. Oh, how he'd missed Hogsmeade. "Ran!" Ran looked up. Striding up the street toward him was a witch with short, mousy brown hair. It took him a minute to identify her, but her usual pale, heart-shaped face was always distinctive. "Tonks," he greeted happily. "You're my escort." "Yes," she said. Tonks looked noticeably less chipper than usual, so when she replied, her voice was brusque and lacking of the usual pleasantry. "We'll want to head out quickly. Hogsmeade's still considered unsafe to Hogwarts students, so the headmaster will want you back at the castle as soon as possible." Fortunately, despite how off-kilter he was on his feet, Ron was able to keep up with Tonks's quick pace, thanks to the large strides his long legs afforded him. Unfortunately, Tonks seemed uninterested in conversation. Ron tried a few times to engage her, but she seemed characteristically distracted and gloomy. "There have been some good editorials in the Prophet lately," Ron said at one point. Said Tonks. "They were fun to read when I was stuck in the ward. A lot of the writers had pen names, but I reckon I know who a lot of them were. Terence Goodfellow, Professor Lupin." Tonks looked up, visibly startled. "Remus." "Yeah, I was surprised too," laughed Ron. "Always knew he was brilliant, but I didn't know he could write that well. But I mean R.J. Moon. A little on the nose, but still pretty brilliant." Tonks looked down at the ground, her eyes narrowing in thought. Ron's smile faltered. "Tonks." The older witch ignored Ron's concern. Forcing composure back to her face, she pressed on, speeding up her steps. "We're almost there now, come on." Soon enough, the towers of Hogwarts Castle started coming into view one by one. As more and more of the castle appeared over the horizon, Ron felt his heart soar. He wondered if this was just a fraction of the feeling that Harry had felt when he'd first laid eyes on Hogwarts, after having lived 11 whole years with his awful family on that boring old block called Privet Drive. When Tonks and Ron passed through the wall of magical enchantments and the line of hardened auras positioned outside the castle, they were met by an entire mob assembled in the courtyard, carrying red and gold banners and streamers. They were all clapping, cheering, shouting, and singing, "Weasley is our king," at the top of their lungs. And as Ron stared, Hermione, Harry, Ginny, and the rest of the Gryffindor Quidditch team broke apart from the crowd, all running to greet him. His heart swelling up like a balloon and his eyes filling with tears, Ron ran to them. Even though his foot kept clenching up and making him stumble, and he constantly felt like he was about to fall over, he somehow made it over to Hermione, throwing both of his arms around her and hugging her tightly. Harry brought his arms around both of them, as did Ginny, and then Demelza and Katie, then Peeks and Coot, and soon the group of Gryffindors were all sobbing happy tears in a squeezing, affectionate clump on the ground. In the singing mob, Ron caught sight of so many beaming faces: Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Kevin, Owen, Hannah, Arjuna and Astoria, Bridget, Professor Ramsay, as well as the white flash that had to belong to Colin's camera. If Ron ever felt the need to make a Patronus in the future, he knew he could just think back on that wonderful feeling of his best friends and Quidditch teammates all huddled around him as the rest of Hogwarts sang his name. The next few days went better than Harry could have imagined. Ron had some trouble getting caught up in class, since his fingers were still so inflexible, and he had to use a quick quotes quill to write his essays. But otherwise, Harry thought he was getting back in the swing of things pretty well. Fortunately, McGonagall had excused Ron from making up all of his past assignments, and Ramsay had been kind enough to give Ron some extra potions and charms tutoring to help him catch up in time for his final exams. Even Quidditch practice wasn't as bad as one could have expected. Sure, Ron still had trouble catching the quaffle, but he could still knock it out of the way and block the hoops with ease. It left Harry feeling confident that the game on Saturday would be an unparalleled success. Harry knew that there was only one thing that could prevent things from going as they should, and that was Malfoy. Although he'd been very good about keeping a happy face on around Hermione and Ron, Harry was still convinced that Malfoy had cursed Katie and poisoned Ron, and was still plotting to help Voldemort. He'd been able to coax Darby, and a bit unwillingly, Creature to help spy on Malfoy while he was busy supporting Ron. And although he'd gotten some new information, the problem remained that, for all of Harry's suspicions, he still had no concrete proof of Malfoy's illicit activities. For one, Harry suspected Malfoy was an unregistered animagus. It would explain why mandrake leaves were stolen from the greenhouses and why the death's head hawk moths had gone missing from the forest, as they were two of the ingredients needed to make the potion. It would also explain why no one saw Malfoy the night the rum was poisoned, and how he got back to the Slytherin common room without Harry noticing. Even if Malfoy had been in his animagus form, the Marauder's map still would have showed him prowling around. Harry had even seen a white cat prowling around the kitchen that night that could have been Malfoy. But despite Harry suspecting this, he had no chance of proving it without catching Malfoy as an animal and then forcing him to reveal himself. And perhaps because Malfoy knew Harry was on to him, he'd not given Harry much chance to do so. And even if Harry could prove Malfoy was an illegal animagus, he still couldn't prove that Malfoy had been down in the kitchens that night without the map. And he both couldn't make the map recall what it had seen that night, or even use the map as evidence with anyone except Dumbledore, and Dumbledore had explicitly told him not to get involved. And of course, there was nothing to provide any rationale for why Malfoy might have done it in the first place. Then there was what Malfoy had been up to in the Room of Requirement. Darby and Creature had told Harry he'd been going up to one hallway a lot lately and disappearing for long hours. After some thinking, Harry realized that Malfoy had to be using the Room of Requirement that he and the DA had used for their club meetings last year. But for the life of him, Harry could not make the Room of Requirement show him what Malfoy was doing in there. Harry at some points waited for hours outside the Room of Requirement under his cloak, trying to catch Malfoy in the act. But Malfoy must have been asking the room for an alternative exit on his way out, because whenever Malfoy reappeared on the map, he would be in a hallway far enough away from Harry that he couldn't catch up. Whatever Harry tried, Malfoy kept evading him, and he got no closer to figuring out what he was up to. Harry's worry about Malfoy continued to weigh on him as the match approached. Malfoy had been disappearing more and more ever since Ron got back, and it left Harry feeling on edge for what he might be planning. Would Malfoy try to hurt people again? Would he try to hurt Ron or Katie or Dumbledore again? On his way downstairs to meet Ron and Hermione in the Great Hall for lunch, Harry absently wandered down the hallway just beside the Room of Requirement, glancing around critically for some sign that a suspicious white cat might have been prowling around. But as always, there was nothing. With a sigh, he backtracked down the staircase closest to him, which led him down the hallway that had once been marred with the blood-etched words, "Enemies of the air, beware." Harry almost felt the same sense of dread shudder down his spine at the memory. Things had been so frightening then, when an unknown monster had been hunting down Muggle-born students. It was scarier now. Now everyone knew who that monster was. It was as Harry passed the open door to the abandoned girls' restroom that he stopped in his tracks. Was someone crying? "No one can help me," choked a male voice that Harry had never heard before. No one would help me if they knew." There, cooed another voice that Harry recognized as Moaning Myrtle's. "That's not true. If you told me, I'd help you. You don't understand," moaned the voice. I can't. Nothing I do is working, and if I don't do it soon, he says he'll heal." Harry, feeling a rush of curiosity and concern that he couldn't help, inched the door open to look inside. When he did, he felt a kind of horror and shock he could never have imagined. The person crying was hunched over the sink, his shoulders quaking, and his white blonde head bowed over as he sobbed. Moaning Myrtle floated in midair beside him, but nothing she whispered or did soothe the aura of despair that emanated off of the boy's back. The owner of that unfamiliar, choked voice wasn't a stranger at all. It was Malfoy. And when Malfoy looked up into the cracked mirror and saw Harry standing stock still and wide-eyed behind him, no one and nothing could have prevented what happened next. Chapter 53. After Sectum Sempra. Chapter text. It didn't take long at all for the entire school to hear all about Malfoy and Harry's confrontation in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom and the gruesome results. Malfoy was sent to the hospital wing after having supposedly gotten his chest slashed open by an unknown spell, and Harry was condemned to nightly detentions for the rest of the school year. This, of course, endangered the Gryffindor Quidditch team's chances of victory yet again, for now they were not only without their captain, but also without their champion seeker. Given its now precarious Quidditch standings, it was unsurprising that most of Gryffindor House was very angry with Harry. What Ron had not expected was how much the rest of the school turned on Harry as well. The Slytherins, naturally, were furious that Harry had attacked their sixth-year prefect, but the Hufflepuffs were horrified by the extent of the damage, and the Ravenclaws seemed to think that Harry was idiotic to use a spell like that in the first place. Ron hadn't been able to get so much as a word out of Owen, Cho, Daphne, or Millicent that entire week. Kevin had talked to Ron as pleasantly as always, but he still pointedly looked around and over Harry while talking to him. Bridget had been kinder than most, but even she was spending a little less time with her Gryffindor friends than usual. "I don't reckon Potter meant to hurt Draco that badly," she'd explained solemnly to Ginny, "but I'm sorry, he was still wrong. He needs to own that." The cooking club member who reacted the worst to the news, however, was Astoria. The day after Harry and Malfoy's wand fight, she had confronted Harry in the hallway, her pale face flushed with a kind of anger Ron had never seen before. "What the hell were you playing at?" she'd yelled at Harry. Ron had immediately stepped in to defend his best friend. "Astoria, Harry was just trying to defend himself. You can defend yourself without slashing somebody open," Astoria retorted. "I wasn't," Harry said weakly, his green eyes rippling with shame. I didn't know it would do that. Didn't know," roared Astoria. Arjuna tried to grab Astoria's shoulder, but Astoria yanked out of her grip, getting right up in Harry's face. The more emotional she got, the more her voice shook. "How dare you even think about using a spell on an innocent person without knowing what it could do? You vile, brainless, unthinking. Astoria, shut it." Ron snapped in a mixture of disbelief and anger. Malfoy was no victim here. He tried to use the Cruciatus curse on Harry. Astoria whirled on Ron, her light blue eyes flaring. "Potter thinks he tried to use the Cruciatus curse," moaning Myrtle said that Malfoy never finished the spell he'd been casting. "And even if Malfoy had been fighting back, and no matter what Potter thinks he did to you, that's still no excuse." Ron's eyes narrowed in confusion. "What?" "I heard you and Malfoy in the hall," Astoria snapped at Harry. "How you accused him of poisoning Ron. Is that why Malfoy first shot spells at you, Potter? Because you were bullying him about your stupid theory?" "No," Harry said quickly. "Then perhaps you attacked him because you thought he'd hurt Ron, and you justified using that spell because he deserved it." "That's not it." Despite her visible upset, Hermione whirled on Astoria with ferocity. "It was only an accident. If you're so disdainful of Harry's theories, perhaps you should start making up baseless ones of your own and leave it alone." Astoria glared at Hermione and then at Harry, her eyes like fiery light blue coals. "However much of a prat Malfoy is, I'd always expected better of you, Potter," she whispered coldly, her voice still shaking despite the lessened volume. "Here I thought someone labeled as the Chosen One would never hurt someone unnecessarily. But then again, maybe that label's gone to your head." She turned on her heel and stormed off, her long chestnut hair sweeping behind her. Arjuna followed after her, her face much more concerned than angry but no less solemn. For his part, Harry seemed to agree with everyone's negative opinions, and then some. He'd barely said a word after what had happened, and had taken to spending long hours in front of the Gryffindor fireplace, staring into the flames, but clearly not seeing them at all. Ron watched Harry sit in front of the fire while he and Hermione worked on their charms essay one night. Eventually, it got to the point that they were unable to continue, as he and Hermione kept looking up to check on Harry instead of reading their textbooks, so Ron put down his S and came over to sit on the rug next to Harry. Harry didn't notice until Ron leaned his shoulder absently against his leg, resting on the floor. "You thought Malfoy was the one who poisoned me?" Ron asked quietly. Harry swallowed the ball of guilt that had formed in his throat. "Yeah." Ron didn't reply. Harry took his silence as disapproval and quickly tried to explain. "That's not why I used that spell. It happened so fast, and he started to say Crucio. It's the only thing he could have been saying, and it was the first spell that came to mind. If I'd known, I would have never." Hermione brought a hand onto Harry's shoulder, squeezing it gently. "We know, Harry," she said softly. Ron took Harry's hand and gave him a small smile. "We know," he said. Regardless of what the rest of the school thought, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny stood by Harry without hesitation. Ron and Ginny even agreed with Harry's choice to not throw away the Half-Blood Prince's book, where Harry had learned that spell he'd used on Malfoy. After all, without that book, Harry wouldn't have had a bezoar on him the day Ron got poisoned. Unfortunately, Harry had had to hide the half-blood prince's book in the room of requirement to hide it from Snape, and he'd had no chance to go back and get it, since Snape was keeping such an extra close eye on him. That made the sixth-year Gryffindor's next potions class with Ramsay incredibly uncomfortable. "Oh, come on, Harry," said Ramsay, his eyebrows coming together in frustration as he looked over the tar-like mixture Harry had turned in at the end of class that was supposed to be a hair-growing potion. "You know that you can't add in the diced caterpillars while it's still on the fire. Get it together." Harry flushed in shame as Pansy and some of the other Slytherins in the class sniggered behind their hands. He was more than used to Snape criticizing his work, but it felt a million times worse when Ramsay did it. Rather than sounding simply cruel, Ramsay's anger rippled with disappointment, as if Ramsay knew Harry could do so much better, and so Harry's lack of results was physically hurting him. To top it all off, Harry's nightly detentions with Snape were just torturous. Every single night, he had to help catalogue Filch's old punishment records, and Snape went out of his way to make Harry go through all of those belonging to Sirius, Lupin, Pettigrew, and his father James Potter, which was a significant stack. After one particularly long detention, Harry headed slowly upstairs toward Gryffindor Tower, dragging his legs along as if they were made of lead. On the way, he was stopped by a familiar voice. "Hi." Harry turned. Coming up on the other side of him was Arjuna, carrying a couple of books under her arms. "Hi," Harry mumbled uncomfortably. Arjuna slowed down slightly to match his steps so that they were walking side by side down the candlelit hall. "Just finished up with Snape, I suppose?" she asked. Harry's eyes drifted down to the floor. Arjuna considered him for a moment, her black eyes trailing over his face thoughtfully. Then she turned her gaze ahead at the hallway before them. "I don't think you meant to do it, Potter," she said quietly. This startled Harry enough to look up. "I reckon the choice you made was just the only choice you saw, even if there were others," said Arjuna. "It's easier for outsiders to say what you could have done or should have done in hindsight, but well, you wouldn't have done any of those things because you didn't see those other choices at the time." "Right. I guess so. Then your mistake was inevitable in a way," Arjuna said with a slight smile. "You had to make it, but that doesn't mean it has to break you." Harry felt the tenseness in his shoulders ebb away a bit. "Are you speaking from experience?" he asked with a wry twinkle in his eye. "Just a little," Arjuna said, her smile broadening. She tossed her loose black braid over her shoulder casually. "Speaking from my own experience also," she said. "If you're dealing with unknown spells, you can always find a clue in its Latin roots. Like you can with words you don't know," she explained, in response to Harry's confused face. "Like take the word geography. The Latin root gea means it has something to do with the earth, and graph means description, so geography is a description of the earth's surface. Spells are the same way. Take lumos. The Latin root is lux, meaning light like the word luminous, and the counterspell, nox, comes from the root meaning darkness." Harry gave a bit of an awkward smile. "Sorry, but that's a little over my head." Arjuna laughed. "Don't worry, you're not the only one. Mum taught me that trick early on when she taught me how to read. It's become second nature to me, but I know it's not for everyone." They had reached the staircase that led to Ravenclaw Tower, so Arjuna climbed the first stair, glancing back at Harry over her shoulder. "Well, see you, Potter. See you," said Harry. Before Arjuna could turn and leave, he added, "By the way, thanks." Arjuna smiled broadly. "You're welcome. And Potter don't hold what Astoria said against her. She's just a soft-hearted sort. She can't imagine injuring anybody, no matter how vile they are. Even if she got bitten by a dragon, I'm sure she'd still somehow find a way to coddle it." The image of Hagrid cooing over a baby Norbert sprouted to Harry's mind and made him grin as Arjuna headed up the stairs and out of sight. Malfoy was stuck in the hospital wing for the next 4 days. Daphne had been tasked by Snape to copy notes for him while he was incapacitated, which soured Pansy somewhat. She'd likely hoped of rekindling her and Draco's past relationship by her tending to him in bed. Still, with her best friend being responsible for helping him, she at least could tag along with her to the hospital wing sometimes. Night before the match against Gryffindor and Ravenclaw, Daphne went to meet up with the cooking club as usual, plopping her things over by Astoria so that she wouldn't have to talk to Ron. It wasn't that she was angry with Ron, really, but she was still very upset about what Harry had done and Ron was supporting his friend, so Daphne just didn't feel like engaging with him. Fortunately, Astoria seemed to be in the same boat. "I can't believe that Ron is defending what he did," Astoria grumbled. "He knows what Potter did was wrong. Potter's his best friend," Daphne said simply. "You defended Balaji after she cheated in the competition. That's different, and you know it." Astoria cut her off sharply. "Of course it is," Daphne said coolly, "but people stand by their friends even when they do awful things. I agree with you," she added quickly, when Astoria opened her mouth to argue further. "I'm just pointing out the facts." Astoria exhaled in a heavy sigh. "This whole thing is so—" "Ah," she muttered sourly. "I never thought in a million years I'd ever feel sorry for Draco Malfoy, of all people." Daphne smirked slightly. "You and me both. Remember when he ruined our new dresses at that ministry Christmas party?" Astoria couldn't completely bite back a grin. "Yeah, though I was angrier about him having pushed me into the punch bowl than a ruined dress." "Speak for yourself," Daphne huffed sardonically. "My dress was gorgeous." Astoria laughed quietly. At that moment, Millicent arrived, sweeping her bag onto the table next to the others. In the process, she knocked over Daphne's bag, making a bunch of papers fly out onto the floor. Millicent did not verbally apologize, instead immediately bending down next to Daphne to help pick up her papers. When she handed one piece of parchment in particular back to Daphne, the elder Greengrass scowled. "Oh," she hissed, before mumbling a curse so lowly under her breath that no one could hear it. "What's wrong?" asked Astoria. "I forgot to bring Draco his notes today," muttered Daphne bitterly. "And now it's too late. Guess I'll have to take them to him in the morning. If I can shake Pansy off ahead of time first." Millicent snorted derisively. "And here I thought she'd given up on Draco." Daphne rolled her eyes up toward the ceiling. "I had too, but no. The minute he gets sent to the hospital wing, she seems to think we're back in third year, and she'll be able to coo over his injury like it's some tiny scratch from a hippogriff, and everything will go back to the way it was. Merlin, I swear, every time she comes with me, she insists on me styling her hair beforehand, all for an encounter that's only ever a minute long at the most with a boy who has already clearly moved on." Feeling some sympathy for her sister, Astoria took the page out of Daphne's hand. "How about I take them then?" she said with a shrug. "I could always drop them off in the morning before breakfast. It sounds like you could use a break from having to deal with Pansy and Malfoy's dysfunctional romance." Daphne covered her mouth with her hand to hold in a soft laugh. "Well, all right, if you're offering." Astoria took Daphne's notes and stuffed them in her bag just as Arjuna entered the kitchens, setting her own bag full of books down on the counter by Astoria's. "Story, I found a great new cookbook about Old English desserts when I was combing through Shakespeare's works in the library," she said eagerly. "I knew I just had to try out the marchpane tart recipe." On Saturday morning, Astoria got up a little earlier than usual, tied her hair up in a messy ponytail, and headed downstairs to drop Daphne's notes off at the hospital wing. The white, sterile room was abandoned, except for one figure lying down in a bed in the center of the room, which was illuminated by the sunlight streaking through the tall windows across the sheets. Draco Malfoy's pale, pointed face looked just as sickly as it had when Astoria had seen him in that hallway. The sheets were drawn all the way up to his neck, but when she entered the room, Malfoy's grey eyes swiveled over to her. "Hello, Malfoy," Astoria said stiffly as she approached his bed. Malfoy's eyes narrowed upon her face. "What are you doing here, little Greengrass?" "Just doing a favor for my sister," she answered lightly. She plopped Daphne's notes down on Malfoy's bedside table. "That's Transfiguration and Defense Against the Dark Arts. Snape's been surprising all of his classes with pop quizzes lately, so you better read up just in case." Malfoy gave a loud scoff and turned away. "You can tell your sister that I've already told her I don't care about getting ready for pop quizzes, so she can quit wasting her time copying all this bunk. That bunk is what you need to know to defend yourself against the dark arts," said Astoria sharply, her eyes narrowing. "Fair. You still believe that rubbish, that little shield charms and Expelliarmus can put you on even footing with the Death Eaters?" sneered Malfoy. "The dark arts are too powerful to be fought against with simple dueling spells. No amount of homework can protect you from the Dark Lord when he comes knocking at your door." Despite Malfoy's attempt at bravado, however, It rang hollowly in Astoria's ears. There was no hint of superiority when Malfoy spoke, like when he was younger. Instead, his tone was almost jaded, cynical, defeated. Astoria fixed Malfoy with a reproachful eye. Maybe not, but I'd still rather know all I can and have a chance at winning than just give up and scrape at you-know-whose feet. Malfoy looked at her with faint scorn, but couldn't seem to summon a proper response, so he simply turned over in bed and away from her. When he did, the sheet slid enough down his frame that Astoria could see his bare, pale back and the outline of a very thick, jagged scar starting at the top of his shoulder and presumably slashing down the front of his torso. Astoria's expression shifted from righteous anger to something a little softer as her light blue eyes lingered on Malfoy's shoulder. "I'm sorry about what happened." "I don't need your pity," snapped Malfoy. "It's not pity," Astoria shot back coldly. She paused and took a breath, trying to re-establish a hold on her temper before she continued. "You must have been hit by a very dark spell, if Madame Pomfrey couldn't remove all trace of it. My uncle once told me that all dark magic is inherently evil because it's irreversible. You can heal some of the damage, but it always leaves a scar. Most spells aren't like that. Even with the spells that cause damage, you can always fix what's broken. Time heals everything, or at least, it's supposed to. To have to be condemned to anything forever, especially something painful like dark magic, I don't think that's a fate anybody deserves." Malfoy lay in completely motionless silence. Upon receiving no response, Astoria shrugged slightly and turned to leave. "What do you know about what I deserve?" came a reply so soft it merely kissed the air. Astoria stopped, slowly turning back around. Malfoy was still facing away from her. For a moment she wondered if she'd simply imagined his question, as he seemed not to have moved at all. She hesitated for a moment, considering her response. Finally, she decided just to be frank. "I know that despite what the prophet says, you're not your father, and his crimes aren't yours. I know that however much you hate Potter, you never would have tried to kill him or his friends. I know that however petty and vindictive and terrible you are, you've never caused any damage that couldn't be fixed, because I know that all those people you hurt grew up and became strong enough that you don't hold any power over them anymore. And because I know all this, I know you didn't deserve getting cut open with dark magic. Not even a Death Eater would deserve something that horrible." With this, Astoria turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving Malfoy once again alone. Chapter 54, The Quidditch Final. Chapter text with Harry out of commission as Gryffindor Quidditch captain. Ginny and Ron immediately jumped in to pick up the pieces. Ginny took on Harry's position as seeker and captain and asked Dean to take over the remaining chaser position. "This whole situation sucks," Ginny told the rest of the team at their last practice before the game, "but we'll just have to make it work." "Fortunately," Ron interjected with a weak smile, "we're all good enough players that we can make it work, right?" Ginny nodded firmly. "Right, so let's go over our respective strategies. Dean, Demelza, Katie, you focus on the 1-2-3 pass method Harry assigned you. Jimmy, Richie, keep the bludgers aimed at me for now, but remember, you'll focus solely on Cho during the match. Give the Chasers time to rack up at least 200 points with a 160-point lead over Ravenclaw before I catch the snitch. Ron, protect those hoops, no matter what. All right, let's go." The game was hosted on Saturday as usual. Everyone crowded into the Quidditch pitch to watch the final match of the season, and spirits were high. Ginny stood in place of Harry at the front of the team as they prepared to walk out onto the field. The team tensely stood around her, holding their breath. It was like all of their hearts were racing in unison as the Ravenclaw team's names were announced one by one. "Here comes the Ravenclaw team, striding up the pitch," chirped a familiar voice that Ron for some reason was having difficulty placing. At the front, Captain and Seeker Cho Chang. "Hi, Cho, hi." A stern clearing of the throat, probably from Professor McGonagall, prompted the commentator to get back on topic. Next, Chasers Noel Harridge, Orla Quirk, and Gerald Vickers, beaters Ashok Khanna and Austin Guthrie, and keeper Stuart Ackerley. Ginny glanced back at her nervous teammates, looking just as white as they were, and yet much braver. "Let's make Harry proud," she said quietly, her lips curled up in a slight smirk. The others attempted weak smiles in return, before Ginny turned to face the field ahead and took the first step, leading the others out onto the pitch. The stands were awash with blue Ravenclaw and red Gryffindor banners. and for a moment, Ron felt like he was right back at the Magic finale preparing to face off against Astoria as he walked out onto the field after the beaters. "Here comes the Gryffindor team," said the commentator brightly. "It's led today by interim captain and seeker, Ginny Weasley, substituting for Harry Potter." A cluster of unpleasant hissing ran over the crowd. Ron looked up at them furiously, but fortunately the commentator firmly yet cheerfully talked over them until everyone quieted down. Chasers Demelza Robbins, Dean Thomas, and Katie Bell, who returns to the field fully recovered from her injuries. "Welcome back, Katie." The mention of Katie instantly quieted any remaining anger, and the Gryffindors in the stands all stood up, applauding and cheering in a standing ovation. Katie blushed pink with pride. Ron looked up at the commentator's stand for the source of the cheery commentary. He was surprised beyond all reason when he caught sight of tiny Rose Zeller, her brown hair in a pair of cute side buns, standing hunched over the microphone that was set up next to McGonagall. It was likely Rose couldn't talk into the microphone properly while sitting, given how short she was. "Beaters Jimmy Peaks and Richie Coot," Rose continued brightly, looking up from the notes she must have scribbled down for herself. "And also recently returned to the field, Ron Weasley." "Hi, Ron." She waved enthusiastically down at him, her face stretched wide with an open smile as she purposefully ignored McGonagall's faintly reproachful, but still rather amused eye. Ron waved up at her in return, grinning from ear to ear as the stands once again burst into applause and song. "Weasley can save anything. He never leaves a single ring. That's why Gryffindors all sing Weasley as our king." The Gryffindor and Ravenclaw teams faced each other at the center of the pitch. Madame Hooch stepped forward as Cho and Ginny split apart from their respective teams and came together. "Shake hands," Hooch said briskly. Cho and Ginny shook hands stiffly. As they split apart and moved back into position, Cho and Ron shot each other a quick nod. "She's not going to go easy on us," Ron thought with a faint smirk as he climbed onto his broom. "Fortunately, we're not going to go easy on them either." Madame Hooch releases the bludgers and the golden snitch. "Ooh, it's so pretty, isn't it?" cooed Rose. "There it goes. Madame Hooch has taken out the quaffle, and it's released. Game on." The match started with a flurry of action that never stopped once. Within the first minute, Gryffindor had already scored its first 10 points. The next minute, Noelle Harridge managed to sideswipe Ron and score 10 points for Ravenclaw. A minute later, 10 more points for Gryffindor, then Ravenclaw again, and then Gryffindor. It was a relentless tug-of-war where both sides were refusing to give each other a single inch. "Vickers has the quaffle. He's tearing up the field. Ooh." Hit by a bludger by Peaks. "That's gotta hurt." Bell's got the quaffle. Robbins, Bell, Robbins, Thomas. Thomas has the quaff. No. Intercepted by Quirk. She's taking it back up the field. She dodges Robbins, dodges a bludger, shoots. No. Blocked by Weasley. Way to use your head, Ron. Bell has the quaffle now. Robbins, Thomas. Intercepted by Harridge. Man, Noelle knows how to fly. They're taking it back toward the goal posts. They shoot. Blocked again by Weasley. Harridge catches the quaffle. Ooh, hit by a bludger by Coot. That could have been worse. Robbins has the quaffle now. Thomas. Bell, Thomas. He dodges a bludger. Passes to Bell. Bell shoots. Score. 10 points to Gryffindor. Rose's excitable commentary, however frenzied, was thrilling to listen to. Thanks to Harry's strategy, the Gryffindor chasers were able to steadily collect points. Unfortunately, thanks to Cho's training, the Ravenclaw chasers remained constantly within 50 points of them. If they were to have any chance of winning the Quidditch Cup, Gryffindor needed an at least 150-point lead before Ginny caught the snitch. Ron knew he wasn't at his best, given that his fingers were still ridiculously inflexible. He'd been able to keep the quaffle at bay pretty well by smacking the ball away with his hands, arms, feet, head, and broom. But the problem was he was unable to catch the quaffle and throw it to his teammates. He'd only been able to hit it away, and sometimes one of the Ravenclaw chasers would catch it instead of one of his teammates, meaning he'd have to immediately protect a hoop again after having just saved it. His eyes darted around the field, watching the quaffle as he tried to think. There had to be a better way to block the hoops. There had to be something he wasn't thinking of. Wait, Samson Wright, the keeper of the Chudley Cannons, used the starfish and stick technique to protect all three hoops during their match against the Falmouth Falcons. Sure, a bludger to the groin had eventually taken him out, but until then he'd protected the goalposts, And even if a bludger made it through the hoops, it wouldn't score any points, so maybe. Noel Harridge was driving up the field, the quaffle in their hands. They zipped around Katie and Demelza and threw the quaffle at the left goal post. Ron immediately whacked it out of the way with his arm, but Harridge caught the ball again and prepared to throw it a second time. Barely taking enough time to think, Ron dropped himself off his broom, catching the handle with his wrist and his ankle, and whacked the ball hard out of the way with his entire torso, catapulting it halfway up the field. "Whoa, did you see that?" screamed Rose as the crowd went wild. He fell off his broom, but then he caught himself, and then whoa. Katie caught the quaffle, grinning from ear to ear as she zoomed away toward the Ravenclaw goal posts, tossing it to Demelza, who then scored. "Nice one, Ron," cheered Peaks. "Thanks," said Ron, panting heavily as he hoisted himself up onto his broom again. "But if I have to do that again, have your beater bat ready, okay?" Ginny came up between them, her brown eyes alight with determined fire. "Jimmy, you stay in this area and protect Ron," she told him. "Richie and I can handle distracting Cho. Let's go." With the Gryffindor goal posts better protected with Ron's new technique and Peaks protecting Ron any time he used it, Gryffindor's lead over Ravenclaw began to multiply. Soon they were 100 points up, then 110, 120, 130. "Score!" yelled Rose. And points to Gryffindor. The stands were screaming themselves hoarse, and the tension on the field was now palpable. If Gryffindor scored 10 more points and then caught the snitch, they would actually win the Quidditch Cup. Cho was taking no chances. Pulling the rest of her team together, she quickly dictated directions to them, before they all went spiraling out onto the field, changing formation. Noel Harridge tailed Katie, their bright hazel eyes flaring in determination as they chased her up and down the field. Katie tried to pass off the quaffle, but whenever she tried, Harridge blocked her. Coot prepared to hit a bludger at Harridge, but Ginny stopped him. "No, if you aim for Harridge, you might hit Katie." Ginny turned to Dean, who was flying several feet away. "Dean, try the Porskoff ploy." With a nod, Dean sharply turned his broom around and dived right under Katie. When he did, however, he found Orla Quirk tailing him the exact same way that Harridge was stalking Katie. Katie, seeing Dean under her, dropped the quaffle so he could catch it. But before Dean could reach it, Orla cut him off, snatching the ball and heading back up the field toward Ron. Peaks whacked a bludger at her, only to have a shark kana fly right in front of him and knock the bludger right back at him and Ron. Fortunately, both Gryffindors were able to evade the heavy black ball before it smashed into one of the pillars surrounding the pitch. Ron dropped down again in his starfish and stick position to whack the quaffle out of the way. Demelza caught it and blazed back toward the Ravenclaw hoops, but immediately had to contend with Gerald Vickers pursuing her. Chose having every one of her players attach themselves to one of ours, Ron realized, effectively cancelling us out. "Ginny," he shouted at his sister. "They're mirroring us." Ginny's brown eyes narrowed. "Cho's making sure we can't score any more points. Well, to the hell with that." She turned to Katie. "Come on, if the Ravenclaws want to tail us so closely, then we'll make them regret it." Katie nodded, before zipping back onto the field, Noel Harridge again at her heels. "Robbins has the quaffle. Oh, hold on. Belle's zipping up the field. Wow, it's like she's in a pinball machine. She's zipping around all over, trying to shake off Harridge, I bet. They're having trouble keeping up. Now Thomas is doing it too, but on the other side of the field, trying to shake off Quirk. Oh, I see now. It's a distraction. Thomas has the quaffle. Quirk's losing steam. Ouch. Quirk's down by a bludger originally hit by Guthrie, but redirected by Coot, and Gryffindor scores. 10 points to Gryffindor. Gryffindor's stands were pulsing with excitement, jumping up and down and screaming. And it was as everyone was going mad that Ginny saw a tiny flare of gold streaking just above the Ravenclaw goalposts. She and Cho, having seen the golden snitch at the same time, both took off like a flash. Stuart Ackerley, who was already protecting the Ravenclaw goalposts, tried to swerve out of the way so that his captain could reach the snitch, but in the process Dean scored another goal. 10 points to Gryffindor, cried Rose. Cho didn't hesitate in the least, however. Her focus still squarely on the snitch, she stretched out her hand, leaning over her broom as she reached. At the last possible minute, Ginny swerved up from below, balancing herself in a weak standing position on top of her broom for just enough seconds to reach up and snatch the snitch right under Cho's nose. Unfortunately, the snitch could offer no kind of support against gravity. Wobbling sharply, Ginny balanced precariously for only a second before she fell off right her broom. She frantically contorted as she tumbled downward, just barely catching the broom handle with one knee. Swaying violently in midair, she held the snitch over her head even as she hanged upside down off of her broom. "Ginny Weasley has caught the snitch," Rose shouted as the entire crowd exploded. "Gryffindor wins. Wait. So, oh my God, I can't believe it. Gryffindor wins the Quidditch Cup. Oh my God." Dean, Demelza and Katie flew over to support Ginny and help her to the ground, even as they were all grabbing onto her and sobbing tears of joy. Peeks and Coot hit the four of them in midair with two hard thumps, shouting at the top of their lungs in excitement. By the time the rest of the team touched the ground, Ron had joined them too, reaching over to pull Ginny off of her broom and yank her into a huge hug. With some difficulty, he folded his numb fingers around his younger sister's wrist and lifted her arm up over both their heads to show off the glittering golden snitch clutched fast between her fingers. "Yeah," Ron bellowed. "Yeah!" The Gryffindors in the stands all poured onto the field, running to the side of their team. At the front were Hermione and Bridget, who dashed past the others and threw their arms around Ron and Ginny, respectively. "I'm so proud of you, Ron," said Hermione breathlessly, tears streaming down her face. "You did so well." Ron squeezed her tightly, reveling in the warmth of her arms. When he looked up, he saw the Ravenclaw team had returned to the ground too. Despite the frustration and disappointment in their expressions, Cho still gave Ron a soft smile and a thumbs up. Ron returned the gesture, smiling broadly and tears welling up in his eyes as the singing and cheering crowd descended upon them. A weeping Professor McGonagall passed Ginny and Ron the golden Quidditch cup, and the Gryffindor team held it aloft over their heads, beaming with pride and utter relief. "Just wait until Harry finds out," Ron thought proudly. "Just wait." Chapter 55. The Two Meetings. Chapter text. Harry had indeed been thrilled when he found out about Gryffindor's victory over Ravenclaw. So thrilled, in fact, that he kissed Ginny in the middle of the stuffed-to-the-brim, partying Gryffindor common room. And that was how, after months and months of Harry trying to tamp down and hide his feelings for Ginny, the two started dating. Being open with his feelings for Ginny and having Ron actually be okay with them had taken a huge burden off of Harry's shoulders and made him feel pounds lighter. It was funny how little his and Ginny's dynamic actually changed. Sure, they were snogging a lot more now, but otherwise it felt very much the same as when Harry would visit the burrow, except it was just the two of them. Ginny and Harry still talked about Quidditch together. They talked about the war and what was going on with the Order. They practiced dueling spells like they did back in the DA. They made each other laugh. And yet it also felt like there were suddenly fewer walls between them than before. Ginny could guess what was on Harry's mind simply by reading his facial expressions, and Harry no longer felt any reluctance in silently taking Ginny's hand whenever she looked the least bit down. As much as his relationship with Ginny had brightened up Harry's whole world, however, dark clouds were creeping in. After 2 more weeks of potions without any assistance from the Half-Blood Prince, Harry got a rather unsettling note from Hedwig on Thursday. "Harry, please meet me in my office at 7:00 Friday evening after dinner. Our meeting will be private and closed door. Gordon Ramsay, for your grades, no doubt," Hermione said dryly. "I told you that you shouldn't have been so reliant on the pry." "Oh, for troll's sake," Ginny snapped. "Lecturing Harry on what he should have done isn't going to bloody well help him now, and you've already hammered in that one lecture more than enough times, so shut it." Hermione looked a bit miffed at Ginny's harsh shutdown. Ron, although he looked just as disapproving of Hermione's response as Ginny, turned to Harry instead. "It is probably about class, though, right?" he asked. "Don't know what else it really could be," Harry nodded gloomily. "Yeah, last class, Ramsay looked like he wanted to shake me. He was so frustrated, disappointed, more like," said Ron. "I reckon Ramsay thinks you're having a rough time of things, since your potion scores have gone down so badly. He probably just wants to make sure you're okay, that's all." When Harry bid Ginny, Hermione, and Ron goodbye at the top of the stairs leading down to the dungeons, he felt like a cold, heavy stone was settling into the base of his stomach, dragging it down somewhere in the area of the floor. Was Ron right? Was Ramsay just going to ask him if he was okay and then let him go? Ramsay had always been pretty nice to Harry in the past. Surely Harry didn't have a reason to worry, yet he worried all the same. He worried all the way down the hall, and as he hesitantly entered Ramsay's empty classroom. Ramsay was standing at the back of the classroom, just outside his office door. From his posture, Harry guessed Ramsay had arrived only a little while before he had. "Hello, Harry," said the potions professor. His tone was measured, and yet neutral enough that Harry couldn't tell if he was angry or not, but he certainly seemed less pleasant than usual. "You wanted to see me, Professor," Harry said uncomfortably. "Yes, I did." Ramsay indicated his open office door. "After you." Unable to shake the discomfort off of his shoulders, Harry kept his posture as strong and confident as he could as he walked past Ramsay into the office. Ramsay closed the door behind both of them before moving behind his desk and sitting down. "Sit down, Harry." Reluctantly, Harry lowered himself into the chair across the desk from Ramsay. The white-dressed potions master considered Harry silently for a short moment, his arms crossed over his chest. Then he rested both arms on the desk and leaned forward in his chair. "Harry, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be completely honest with me," he said brusquely, his blue eyes locked squarely on Harry's face. "Have you been cheating in my class?" Harry froze. "No," he said instinctively before he could stop himself. Ramsay's eyes narrowed slightly upon Harry's face. Harry felt as though his stomach was being tied in knots, but he had no idea how to backpedal, even if he wanted to. If he admitted that he'd been cheating, then he'd have to turn in the prince's book to Ramsay. Snape would figure out that that book was where he'd found the spell that had hurt Malfoy. Snape would probably retroactively punish him for not having given him the potions book he'd originally asked for. And the thought of Ramsay knowing Harry was a liar, of Dumbledore and McGonagall, and the whole school knowing Harry was a cheater, that was terrifying. But if Harry didn't admit it, would Ramsay expel him? Could he expel him? The minutes dragged on, and Harry was struck dumb, unable to figure out how to tell the truth, or even if he should. Finally, Ramsay exhaled heavily through his nose, straightening up slightly. "After the trauma you went through in your duel with Draco, I'd assumed at first that the two of you were, understandably, shaken," he said quietly. "I thought you both would get back in the swing of things after a little while. But these last 3 weeks, you have suddenly turned into the worst student in the class, with potions so pathetic it's as if you haven't studied the entire semester." Harry said feebly, "I've just had a lot on my mind lately." "I hope that's true, Harry," Ramsay said solemnly, his sharp blue eyes boring into Harry's face critically. "I sincerely hope so." There was a cold silence between the two of them, in which Ramsay slowly inched himself to his feet. He towered over Harry, who was still seated. "Regardless of what's going on in your life, I think it's time you're reminded of how important your schooling is. At present, your marks are poor enough that if they do not improve dramatically and soon, I will assign you a failing grade and deny you entry into seventh-year potions." Harry's heart convulsed in terror. "What? And as you know," Ramsay continued harshly, "without passable potion scores, you will not become an Auror. I will personally send an owl to the Auror office and make sure they know all about your lack of qualifications." Harry sat in horrified, numb silence as Ramsay plowed on. "If you had admitted to cheating at the start, I would have forgiven your mistake and helped you study. But since you've made it clear that you were not cheating, you should have no difficulty getting your marks up to scratch before our final exam in 2 weeks. You know, the one I mentioned at the beginning of term, where I give out another bottle of Felix Felicis. If you impress me in the final exam, I will give you a grade that will allow you to continue potions next year. If not, well, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you'll just have to find another career path." Ramsay's expression was harder than Harry had ever seen it as he crossed his arms. "Oh, and if you think admitting to any wrongdoing now will change my mind, I'm afraid it's too late for that. You've made your choice. Now you'll need to deal with the consequences and put in the work by yourself." Harry felt as though all of his strength had abandoned him. Surely all of the color had drained out of his face. Maybe even his entire face had gone as pale and translucent as a ghost, given by how cold he suddenly felt. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice such a weak shadow of its usual self it was like he really had become a ghost. Ramsay's sharp blue eyes bore into Harry for another moment before he migrated over to his office door and opened it again. "You may go." Slowly turning around to look up at the open door, Harry shakily got to his feet and slumped through the open door. He could feel Ramsay's eyes on his back as he shuffled out of the classroom, feeling as though he was slowly melting deeper and deeper into the floor with every step out of the dungeons and back up the stairs toward the Gryffindor common room. Harry wasn't even sure if he'd make it up there, given by how deep underground he suddenly felt. About a half hour later, another figure migrated slowly down the hallway toward the potions classroom. Draco Malfoy had also received a letter from Ramsay requesting a meeting. Draco frankly didn't know what it was for, and he told himself he didn't care. After all, he'd had little interest in Ramsay's class earlier in the year, just as he'd had little interest in his other classes. None of his classes felt all that important anymore, now that his father was in Azkaban. Mr. Malfoy had always been the one to push Draco to do well in school, not just because he expected Draco to do well, but because Draco wanted to do well. His father was proud when he did well in school. He made his father look good when he did well, but nothing Draco could do could make Mr. Malfoy look good anymore. Not since Potter and his stupid friends, and the Order of the Phoenix, and that muggle lover Dumbledore got him caught at the Ministry. Now everyone had turned against Mr. Malfoy and his family at the drop of a hat. Everyone had turned against Mr. Malfoy. Everyone had turned against Draco, too. The Slytherin Quidditch team had abandoned him after he quit. Crabbe and Goyle had lost all respect for him. Even Pansy had finally gotten fed up with him not telling her anything and would probably only forgive him now if he went back to how he'd been before. And Draco knew there was no going back. It was impossible to go back. He was one of the Dark Lord's servants now. That meant he was in the same boat as Mr. Malfoy. People would only accept his presence so long as they didn't know the truth about who he was, what he was wrapped in. I know that despite what the prophet says, you're not your father, and his crimes aren't yours. Draco shoved the words and the dark-haired face with piercing blue eyes that accompanied it out of his mind. Idealistic twit, he thought dully. She thinks all I've ever done is have a laugh about people. She doesn't know what I've done, what I have to do. Hating that he'd even given Daphne's brat sister a single thought, Draco walked through the potions classroom, coming to a stop just outside the doorway of Ramsay's office. Ramsay was sitting at his desk grading papers, but as soon as Draco approached, he looked up. Draco, good of you to come. Close the door and sit down. Although he had no interest in doing anything of the sort, Draco bit his tongue and half-heartedly obeyed, pulling the office door closed behind him and then slowly settling down on the very edge of the chair that he was offered. With a flick of his wand, Ramsay levitated a plate full of what looked like chocolate truffles from a side table and plopped them down gently on the wood between them. "Help yourself," Ramsay said politely. Draco glanced down at them, forcing the disdain from his face as best he was able and projecting his best unreadable, stony expression. "No, thank you," he said stiffly. Ramsay didn't seem the least bit unsettled by the rejection. It was almost as if he'd expected it. Instead, he merely rested his hands down on his desk, interlacing the fingers. "Draco, as I'm sure you know, your marks have been consistently poor in my class." Draco really wanted to roll his eyes, but he didn't. "Professor Snape spoke very highly of your abilities before term started, but I'll be honest, I'm anything but impressed," continued Ramsay. "If your marks don't improve, then I'm afraid you won't be able to continue potions next year." Draco raised his eyebrows dully, then crossing his arms, he leaned back in his chair, looking at Ramsay with the most condescending of looks. "And?" he asked coolly. "With all due respect, Professor, you're telling me things I already know, so unless there's anything else, I'll be going now." "As it happens," said Ramsay lowly, "there is." Draco had been preparing to leave, but at Ramsay's words he stilled before slowly descending back down on the chair. Ramsay's blue eyes narrowed seriously, and he leaned forward slightly in his chair, considering his next words carefully. "Draco, I know you're going through some difficult things right now." Draco couldn't fight back a scoff. "Do you?" he sneered sarcastically. "Well, look here, old Dumbledore hired a right genius. Where'd you hear about my little sob story, the Daily Prophet?" To his credit, Ramsay didn't take Draco's bait. "I know because I also had to grow up way too fast at 16, the professor said sharply. Sure, my father was not in Azkaban, but I know the feeling of having a parent who you love so much, and yet is so flawed as a human being. You don't know anything about my father, Draco snapped before he could stop himself. I know more than enough of him, Ramsay said quietly. Lucius left Hogwarts before I arrived, but I remember him back in those days, as well as his friends, amongst the Death Eaters, Caspar Crabbe, Jeremy Goyle, Bellatrix Black, Rodolphus and Rabastion Lestrain, Alecto and Amicus Caro. I remember how all of them came up one by one to face the Wisengamot, how some of them escaped the first time, and others didn't. Draco felt his fists clenching. He tried desperately to hold his temper in, but it felt like Ramsay was egging him on. He had to be egging him on, that soft voice he was using, feigning sympathy. It was just a knife he was having fun twisting into Draco's back. And there's something I realized about the people who escaped Azkaban the first time, said Ramsay. All of them had one thing in common. What? Spat Draco. Ramsay's mouth spread into a very tiny, odd smile. Family. Every last one of them had a spouse and a child whom they loved unconditionally. The ones who didn't, the Lestranges, the Caros, who only ever obsessed over you-know-who and his demented beliefs and never learned what love really means, were too inhuman to ever be pitied. No one thought they could have been innocent, that they had good in them. Draco stared at Ramsay, perfectly baffled. Ramsay leaned forward enough to rest his chin on his folded hands over the desk. Obviously, I don't know everything you're going through, Draco. I'm not so arrogant as to claim that, he said. But I know better than anyone how it feels to be a young man being pressured by the adults around you to join a war that you're not ready to fight in. I have still not forgiven Dumbledore for trying to recruit me to the Order, back when I was too young to understand what I was signing my life away to. Even if I had so wanted to join the war effort at first, I realized more and more how much I wanted nothing to do with it as things got worse. And given your family's allegiance, I'm quite sure you felt the pressure to follow in your father's footsteps once you graduate. That's why you think nothing matters, isn't it? Because you don't think you'll have a future outside the war you'll have to fight. Draco's heart was beating very fast now. He tried so hard not to say anything, no matter how much anger pulsed through his veins, or how much fear thumped in his chest, or how much part of him ached and screamed about how true the words were. Ramsay considered Draco with a sympathetic eye. You don't have to do everything alone, Draco, he said. If you need help, I will help you. All you have to do is ask. It was that kindness that made Draco finally snap. He got up, his face very pale and his grey eyes blazing with unrestrained hatred as he got right up in Ramsay's face. Who says I'd ever want your help? You filthy mudblood. Somehow. However, even his fiercest, cruelest, most hate-filled words sounded almost pathetic ringing in his ears. Ramsay's posture had stiffened visibly at the insult. He stared Draco down, even as the pale sixth year panted heavily and glared viciously, and his sharp blue eyes remained oddly composed despite the fire therein. Then finally, Ramsay broke eye contact, rising to his feet slowly. Very well, Draco. You've made your point clear. He walked slowly over to his office door. Draco stood frozen in front of the desk, unable to shift his posture in the slightest however much he wanted to. The door to the office opened with a quiet creak. You may go, said Rams. Draco finally forced himself to turn around. He strode back over to the door, avoiding Ramsay's eyes pointedly. Regardless of your position, my offer still stands, Ramsay said lowly as Draco walked past him and out of the office. Oh, and for the record, perhaps my blood may be dirty in your mind, but at least my name is pristine. Chapter 56, Ramsay's Test. Chapter text Harry had been very reluctant to tell Ron, and especially Hermione, about what Ramsay had told him that evening. But after a while of them ganging up on him, he broke down and told them everything. Hermione, to her credit, did not take the opportunity to scold Harry again. Instead, she immediately moved into fix-it mode. If you're going to pass potions, we've got to get you ready for that final exam, she said firmly. I suppose one nice thing is you no longer have Quidditch to worry about, so we can put all our attention on preparing for it. I'll go ahead and draw up some studying schedules with specific focus on potions. Then Ron and I can help you study. The very next day, the three Gryffindors started studying potions together every afternoon in the library. Unfortunately, neither Ron nor Hermione were very good at actually teaching the material. Hermione would recite entire passages from the textbook in an attempt to describe the chemical effects between hemlock and beetle's eyes, but Harry found himself tuning out after a while instead of following any of it. Ron was a little better, as he'd gotten some tutoring sessions with Ramsay, but he was still rather behind on the material himself, so he was unable to answer certain questions. Well, the way Ramsay described it, billywig stings tend to make a potion thinner, I guess, because when you get stung by a billywig, you tend to float, Ron explained during their third day of studying. So if you've got to make a potion thicker, you'll need to counteract the stings with a bit of mandrake root. Why would you need to make a potion thicker? Asked Harry. Ron smiled sheepishly, glancing over at Hermione for an answer. A potion's thickness is in direct proportion to the robustness of the potion's effects, Hermione answered promptly without looking up from the notes she was shuffling through. Ron turned back to Harry uncomfortably. There you go, then, he muttered, unable to bite back his sarcasm. Harry frowned. Basically, a thicker potion will last longer and have stronger effects, said a low voice from behind them. The three Gryffindors all looked up, startled. Millicent Bulstrode had settled down at the table next to theirs, her back to them, and her gaze locked on her own open textbook rather than on them. "Oh," said Harry awkwardly. "Thanks." Millicent slightly inclined her head in a nod without looking up from her book. "I'm surprised you forgot that, Potter," she said dryly, "considering how happy Ramsay was when you remembered to compensate for the natural thinning of the Wiggenwald potion by adding in that salamander blood." "Ah, well," Harry said uncomfortably, trying to tamp down the embarrassed flush moving up his face. "I was just experimenting. Back then, I didn't really know it did that." Whether Millicent believed this or not, Harry couldn't tell. Regardless, she continued to speak to him without turning around. "If all you can do is make good guesses, that's really going to show on the final exam," she said. "Ramsay said he's not going easy on us." Her brown eyes had drifted over her shoulder, even though she was still facing away. "No disrespect to you, Weasley, Granger, but from the sound of things, Potter needs some real tutoring, not just review. Simple studying's not going to cut it this late in the game if you don't understand what you're studying in the first place." Ron quirked an eyebrow at Millicent, then he smirked slightly. "Is this you volunteering to help, then?" Millicent stiffened, hunching over defensively like she had been slapped on the back. "What? Well, you're really good at potions," Ron said smoothly. "Slughorn himself said he hadn't seen a pepper-up potion in years that was as good as the one you made for our soup hand. From the sound of things, you understand the material well enough to explain it." "I don't explain things to people," Millicent answered dully. "You just did literally 30 seconds ago." "Don't try to be clever, Weasley. You'll embarrass yourself." Ron snorted with laughter. Millicent, despite herself, found herself smiling a little too, but she hid it well by bowing her head over the book in front of her. "If you'd be willing to help, Millicent, we'd really appreciate it," said Hermione shyly. "Harry can't become an Auror unless he passes potions, and as much as I hate to admit it, I don't think Ron and I are helping that much." Harry looked down at the book set up in front of him, nodding in begrudging agreement. Millicent considered the matter for a moment. Finally, after a long moment, she spoke again, very levelly and lowly. "If you really need help, Potter, I'll tutor you on 3 conditions." "And what are those?" asked Harry hesitantly. "1. You won't tell anyone that I'm tutoring you, except perhaps your girlfriend. No sense in her thinking we're seeing each other or something stupid. 2. I'll expect a salary of 1 galleon per session. I know that's something you can afford, and I could use some extra pocket change to buy a new cat next year. 3. Your prefect friends will reward Slytherin House 50 points for my generosity," she said with a broad smirk over her shoulder in Ron's direction. Ron raised an eyebrow at Hermione, his lips touched with a wry smile. Hermione, despite the disapproving frown on her face, gave a reluctant sigh and nodded. "Deal," said Harry. The very next day, Harry started his tutoring sessions with Millicent in the Hogwarts kitchens. The whole experience was a touch surreal. Harry was glad that he never had to try saying the sentence, "I'm being tutored in potions by Millicent Bulstrode," out loud to anyone, because he felt like he'd get shut up in a mental ward in 3 seconds. To Harry's surprise, though, Millicent was a pretty good tutor. Her manner of speaking was very short and brusque, But because of that, she kept her points very succinct and simple to follow. Rather than just explain the potions theoretically, she made Harry brew the potions as she explained each concept, including adding in ingredients that made potions explode or melt through the cauldrons in order to make her point. Not going to forget not to mix a rampant tail with snake fangs again, now are you? Millicent said coolly as Harry nursed several minor burns on his fingers. She took out a bottle of clear lavender-colored potion and, applying it to a small towel Winky had provided for them, handed it to Harry. Harry took the cloth, running it over each of his fingers in turn so that the burns slowly started to fade. "So what have we learned?" Millicent asked him. Harry frowned slightly. "Aggressive ingredients don't mix. Unless you also add in a mediating ingredient." Millicent nodded. "So what sort of ingredient could we have added before adding the snake fangs as a cushion?" Harry considered his options. Honeywater would water down the ingredients and make them less volatile, but then the effects of the potion would also become more muted. Fluxweed was a good palate cleanser between ingredients, but it tended to magnify whatever ingredient was added after it. "Would peppermint work?" asked Harry. Millicent blinked, a bit taken aback. "I guess it could," she granted, raising an eyebrow. "But why would you want to use that?" "Ramsay used it to counteract the rue in the Felix Felicis earlier in the year," Harry said slowly. "Rue can be sort of bitter, so I reckon peppermint sort of balances that out right." Millicent's expression softened just slightly. She wasn't smiling exactly, but she was clearly pleased by Harry's response. "Exactly right. Peppermint is a soothing plant. It's great for getting rid of nasty side effects without canceling out any of the effects a potion's supposed to have. It's not usually mixed in the middle of potions, but that doesn't mean it isn't an option." Millicent cleared out the remnants of the messed-up potion in their cauldron so they could start again. "Let's try the elixir to induce euphoria again. This time, we'll try stirring the potion both clockwise and counterclockwise, and go over which one works better and why." Harry's first elixir to induce euphoria ended up making him double over in fits of hysterical laughter that Millicent only reversed with a bottle of antidote after watching Harry squirm around on the floor for a good 5 minutes. Then she got to work explaining stirring directions. When trying to blend the ingredients, you stir clockwise. When trying to separate the ingredients, you stir counterclockwise. Pretend that the two ingredients are misbehaving and you're breaking them up before they get in a big fight. Harry considered the potion bubbling in the cauldron, stirring once counterclockwise and then reaching for the unicorn hair. Then you can add in other ingredients to balance them out while they're separate. "Yeah," Harry smiled wryly. "You know, Millicent, you'd be a great potions teacher." Millicent gave a great snort. "Sorry, but I have other plans." Harry raised an eyebrow at her curiously. "My parents expect me to take on their legal business after I graduate," Millicent explained as she shifted the cauldron over a little and added in a pinch of honeywater. "They serve as defense attorneys in trials held by the Wisengamot." Harry was reminded of his own experience with the Wisengamot when he was tried for using underage magic the previous year. Dumbledore had served as his representative during the trial and had prepared a full-scale defense well ahead of time. Harry tried to imagine himself facing down the entire Wisengamot by himself and couldn't help but be intimidated by the thought. "Do you want to do that?" he asked, feeling a bit of pity. "Yeah," said Millicent matter-of-factly. "I'll just have my own way of doing things when I take it over." "Like what?" "Taking different clients. Mother and father have always attracted shady, rich clients, old friends who need a favor. I'd shift our focus to being public defenders, help out clients like small business owners or house elves who can't afford good representation normally." Harry felt a rush of admiration despite himself. "That's cool." "Well, given our past dealings, we've saved up enough that we can more than afford some charity," Millicent said with a dismissive shrug. "At least until our improved reputation earns us a profit. And besides, the ministry needs a good kick in the pants. We may as well give it to them. That's why you're going for the aura department rather than teaching defense like you did in that club last year, isn't it?" Harry nodded. It was so strange thinking about the DA now. Just last year, Millicent was part of Umbridge's inquisitorial squad, and now here she was, teaching him potions. Millicent took out a vial and sampled the potion she and Harry had just brewed. "All right, let's test it." If I fall onto the ground contorting with laughter again, will you please give me the antidote a little more quickly this time? Harry asked coolly. Millicent smirked slightly. Fine. Millicent and Harry continued their sessions every night until exams began in the second week of June. By the time they were finished, Harry actually felt hopeful about his chances. Sure, there was a lot he still needed to master, as Millicent frequently reminded him, but he still felt like he had a better handle on what he was doing than he had before. When the day of the potions exam came, Harry tried his very best to stay optimistic. It was a little easier when Ginny spent all of breakfast helping him review the notes Hermione had written for him, which were in retrospect quite a bit easier to read now that Harry could refer back to one of the potions he'd made explode in his sessions with Millicent. By the time breakfast was over and Harry, Ron, and Hermione had to head to the exam, Harry felt quite a bit lighter, particularly when Ginny gave him a long, warm kiss to wish him luck. Ah, please, for the love of Merlin, don't do that again when I'm within viewing range. Ron grumbled good-naturedly to Harry as they and Hermione headed downstairs to the dungeons. When they arrived in the potions classroom, they found the rest of the Gryffindors and Slytherins, including Millicent, already waiting. Millicent and Harry exchanged glances, but did not verbally address each other as Ramsay entered the room and strode up to the front of the class. Welcome, sixth years, pronounced Ramsay, clapping his hands together in front of him. Today your test will be a singularly difficult challenge, to brew a potion without a recipe. This potion is one we've discussed, but never brewed before, and you won't find it anywhere in our textbook. The students nervously sneaked glances at each other. A Mortentia, Ramsay finished with a satisfied smile. As Hermione called it at the beginning of term, the most powerful love potion in the world. I will bring you up, one by one, into my office, and you will brew your best attempt at the potion for me. And as a reminder, the person who shows the most improvement from the draft of the living death they turned into me at the beginning of the year will receive this. Ramsay reached into his white robes and held up another tiny vial of glittering, bronze-colored Felix Felicis. All of the students, even Malfoy, straightened up visibly. When you're done with your exam, you will leave the classroom so that your classmates have a chance to do it themselves, said Ramsay. We'll be going alphabetically by last name, so Millicent Love, you're first. Straightening up slightly, Millicent set her jaw and then slowly followed Ramsay into his office. Ramsay closed the door behind them with a quiet snap, leaving the rest of the students alone to wait. It was grueling, watching each student go up one by one. When Millicent came out of Ramsay's office, she looked a little pale but predictably stoic. When Tracy Davis came out, she put on her best confident smirk, but it was clearly trembling. When Hermione came out, she looked frazzled. She wanted to tell Ron and Harry how it had gone, but Ramsay cleared his throat pointedly when she opened her mouth to speak to them, and Hermione obediently left the room, while Ramsay turned to Daphne with a smile, escorting her into his office and closing the door behind them. Malfoy's turn followed Daphne's. He strode after Ramsay with his best attempt at his usual swagger, and although it wasn't fully convincing, he did at least manage to keep his nerves from his face. The exam itself was very taciturn and tense, with Malfoy only speaking when Ramsay asked him a question about what he was brewing. When his potion was complete, it didn't have the clear consistency it needed, but he could still make out the familiar smells of the ocean and boysenberry punch. As he left the office, he kept his expression purposefully stony, ignoring Pansy when she tried to catch his eye and fumed furiously upon him ignoring her. After Alois Midgen, Pansy, and Parvati, it was Harry's turn. Ron gave him an encouraging thumbs up as Harry followed Ramsay into his office and came to stand in front of Ramsay's desk, where a cauldron and a whole bunch of ingredients were laid out. Okay, Harry thought, his eyes running over the ingredients as Ramsay came to sit behind his desk and watch. First, we'll need something strong that we can add onto. He reached for the salamander blood, pouring it into the cauldron. Then he pulled a few other ingredients closer to him, moondew, lacewing flies, lady's mantle, dandelion root, and hawklump juice, and started adding them in little by little. As he worked, Harry felt Ramsay's sharp blue eyes boring into him. Why lady's mantle? Ramsay asked abruptly. Ha! Harry looked up, startled. Keep working, said Ramsay briskly, but tell me why you added lady's mantle. Awkwardly, Harry picked up the bottle of dandelion root and began adding it, stirring the potion twice clockwise. Ladies' mantles used in beautification potions, he mumbled. And, prompted Ramsay. And. Harry continued uncomfortably as he poured in the Horklump juice. A Mortentia is supposed to be an obsession potion, not a love potion, since love can't really be made into a potion. So it's supposed to make you see the person as really attractive, right? So, abruptly his potion gave a terrible hiss, fizzling multicolored, foul-smelling smoke. Panic rising in his chest, Harry quickly stirred the potion twice counterclockwise and, grabbing a sprig of peppermint, tossed it in. In a moment, the potion quieted, losing most of its color and turning a cool gray. "Nice save," Ramsay said dryly. Harry looked up at him. To his relief, the potion's professor was smiling as he brought the cauldron with the gray potion inside closer to him so he could examine it. "Peppermint was a very good choice," he said, spooning out some of the potion to get a better look at it. Harry's own face spread into a smile. "Well, I got it from you." Ramsay's blue eyes twinkled as he put the spoon down. "Would you like to know where I got it from?" Blinking in slight surprise, Harry nodded. "Your mother," said Ramsay. "We were both in Horace's slug club back in the day, thanks to our skill in potions. Lily and Horace were the first people who really encouraged me to pursue potions and my cooking, so I guess, in a way, it's thanks to them that I'm who I am today." Ramsay brought his hands down onto the desk, leaning forward slightly. "I'm glad that you're finally getting it, Harry," he said, his voice mutedly proud. "Don't get me wrong now, your potion is all off. I wouldn't even let a garden gnome sample it, but you obviously put in a lot of work and used your head." Harry's heart hopped into his throat. So you won't fail me?" "No, Harry, I won't fail you. Again, your potion probably won't get you a high grade, but you've earned a second chance." Harry grinned so widely, it felt like his face was going to crack like china as he left the room. He couldn't tell Ron anything of what had happened inside yet, so he strode to the outside hallway to meet with Hermione and excitedly tell her what had happened. Then they told Ron everything when he joined them. When everyone was done, Blaise, Zabini, and Ramsay came out into the hall to summon the class back inside. The students all sat at their assigned desks, while Ramsay returned to the head of the class. "First of all, congratulations to all of you," Ramsay began. "I still need to assign individual grades, but I'll reassure you now that you all passed the exam." The entire class exhaled in immense relief. Some of your potions came close, and some were far off the mark, but that, in the end, is not what mattered. What mattered were the choices you made and why you made them. You used your own intuition about what ingredients you should use and how you should brew them based on what sort of potion you intended to make. That is a skill even the most talented of potioneers take a long time to develop, let alone perfect, and you're all well on your way to mastering it if you put in the proper amount of work in the future. With a wry smile, Ramsay took the vial of Felix Felicis back out of his robes. "But of course I'm sure all of you are dying to know who won. The student who earned this did not make the best potion today, but he impressed me all the same, more than any other student. That student is Draco Malfoy." Everyone reacted with visible shock, including Malfoy. "Congratulations, Draco," said Ramsay, offering the tiny bottle to Draco with a soft smile. "You really tried today, and I couldn't be happier to see such effort, believe me." Malfoy stared down at the vial for a moment, disbelieving. He took it quickly, holding it close to his chest and staring at it, almost as if he thought Ramsay was going to swipe it back. Then very slowly, his face spread into a strange, fragile, almost manic smile. It twisted his pale face unnaturally, almost like Malfoy had forgotten how to smile, and so he was having trouble figuring out what muscles did what. Then almost as quickly, the smile faltered and died, leaving his face twitching. "Thank you, sir," he mumbled, his voice very hushed, and his stormy grey eyes locked on the tiny bottle in his hand. Ramsay noticed the bizarreness of Malfoy's expression, but did not appear concerned. Instead, he merely nodded kindly. "You're welcome." He turned to the class. "Well, so long for the year, everyone. It's been fun, and make sure you study up for next year. Seventh year is a huge handful to deal with, I assure you." As the class filed out, though, Ron turned to Harry and Hermione, his mouth twisted into a deep frown. "Harry," he said lowly, "I hate to say it, but maybe you were onto something when you said Malfoy's acting a little weird." Chapter 57, Dumbledore's Request. Chapter text. Everyone seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief when exams ended, none more so than Carlin, Ginny, and the other fifth years, finally completing their owls. The last week of term soon arrived, and everyone started their usual packing up in anticipation of the Hogwarts Express returning them home at the end of the week. Most people were taking the remaining time to relax and spend time with their friends. One of the few exceptions was Arjuna, who missed the last meeting of the cooking club Sunday afternoon because she was sick in bed. Her fever's been so bad that she hasn't been able to sleep at all for 2 days, explained Astoria, looking concerned. Whenever she tries, she ends up having these awful night terrors that make her wake up in a cold sweat. I told her to lie down and try to rest today. I reckon we can go see Madame Pomfrey in the morning if she's still not feeling better. By Sunday evening, Ramsay had just finished grading the last of his students' exams when he was interrupted by a knock on his office door. "Come in," he called without looking up from his papers. The door opened with a quiet squeak. Once Ramsay was finished with the line he was working on, he looked up to see Professor McGonagall striding into the room. "An owl arrived in the great hall with a letter for you," said the deputy headmistress demurely, holding out an envelope. "From your fiancé, I would assume. I thought to bring it downstairs so that the owl wouldn't go flapping down the hallways searching for you." Ramsay grinned as he took the letter from McGonagall, his eyes running over the front. "Yep, that is Tana's handwriting. Much obliged." McGonagall nodded politely. "There is one other matter. The headmaster asked to see you in his office after you're done with your work this evening. I dare say he thinks to ask about your continued employment." The tone the sentence ended on, as well as McGonagall's curiously raised eyebrow, signaled to Ramsay that she was wondering about that as well. Ramsay smiled wryly. "Well, I suppose if Dumbledore hasn't found someone suitable enough to take my place, someone who isn't Severus Snape, mind you, I could be persuaded to return. Though I'd have to discuss the matter over with Tana first. She's spent a good chunk of an entire year without me. I don't know how she'd do with another." McGonagall's lips spread into a dewy smile. "Yes, I'm afraid romance is not well suited to professorship, by and large." She turned on her heel and headed for the door. Before leaving, however, she looked back over her shoulder. "Gordon, I know your reasons for not joining the Order, and I understand them. I didn't join up during the First War either, given my undercover work with the Ministry. But I must be honest, we could really use your help. Hestia has been trying hard to track a small group of guilders who have tried kidnapping random muggles and pressing them into their service. And Remus has been undercover for almost a year, yet he's hardly sent any word out in the last 2 months." Ramsay's eyes narrowed upon his desk. The thought of Remus Lupin, the Gryffindor prefect who'd shared chocolate bars with his classmates when they were down, being in trouble made the chef's stomach crumple up in his chest as if it were made of paper. "Minerva, the Order is still trying to indoctrinate children into their ranks," he said sharply. "You can't expect me to accept that. I'm frankly shocked that you do." "Those children are legal adults," McGonagall said reproachfully, turning more fully back around. "Nymphadora Tonks, Fleur de Lacre, Bill, Charlie, Fred, and George Weasley. They may be young, but they are more than willing and capable enough to fight. And given how starved we've been in finding people who are willing to fight he who must not be named, we need all the help we can get." "And Harry," Ramsay challenged her. "Has Dumbledore not been grooming him to run out onto his battlefield too?" McGonagall straightened up to her full, impressive height. "Potter is following Dumbledore out of his own choice, Gordon," she said, her stern voice ringing with righteousness. "And regardless of how much you or I might worry for Potter's safety, we have no right to make his choices for him. If nothing else, Potter has more than proven himself capable in fighting the dark arts over the course of the last 5 years." "That doesn't mean he should," said Ramsay, crossing his arms stubbornly. McGonagall sighed. "I'm afraid things rarely go as they should," she replied soberly. With this, she turned and strode out of the classroom, leaving Ramsay alone once again. Not long later, Ramsay went upstairs to the headmaster's office, as Dumbledore had requested. With a mutter of acid pops, he walked past the gargoyle as it moved out of the way, and he climbed the stairs to the open office door. Dumbledore was already waiting in the tall chair behind his desk, wearing greyish-blue robes with long sleeves that ran down his entire arms. There was a black traveling cloak folded up neatly on the left corner of the desk. "Hello, Gordon," Dumbledore greeted pleasantly. "Do close the door, would you?" Ramsay pulled the door closed and strode over, stopping a good foot in front of Dumbledore's desk. "You wish to see me?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Yes," said Dumbledore quietly, his lips touched with a small smile. "There's an important matter that we must discuss tonight, before term comes to a close." He picked up a glass bowl of toad-shaped chocolates with his uninjured hand and placed it between them on the wood. "Might I offer you a peppermint toad?" he asked mistily. "I seem to recall that they're your favorite." Ramsay raised an eyebrow at Dumbledore suspiciously. "I know you didn't call me in here just to offer me candy, you old dodger," he reproached him. "Don't beat around the bush." Dumbledore smiled almost fondly. "As always, Gordon, I so enjoy your elegant turns of phrase." There was something almost bizarrely sad in the headmaster's eyes that Ramsay had never seen before. It made him suddenly feel very ill at ease. His sharp blue eyes trailed across the desk, resting on the black traveling cloak in the corner. "Are you going somewhere?" Ramsay asked lowly. "Yes, I'm afraid I am," said Dumbledore with a sigh. "I wanted to speak with you before my departure. You see, Gordon, the mission I'm undertaking will be a touch perilous. It's possible, given my health, that I may not be as up to it as I would have been in the past. Don't worry," he said when Ramsay's eyebrows furrowed. "I won't be alone." Any trace of concern on Ramsay's face was abruptly buried by scorn. "Ah, yes," he muttered. "It would be unlike you not to drag someone else along on your dangerous little playdate." Dumbledore didn't react with any anger. Instead, he merely looked solemn. "Gordon, I called you here because I need a favor of you," he said quietly. "While I am away, Hogwarts will need all the protection possible. All the more reason for you not to go off chasing Death Eaters and actually protect your school," Ramsay shot back coldly. "What I am doing is necessary to protect the school, Gordon, as well as the rest of the wizarding world. Forgive me if I don't see how abandoning your responsibility is a form of protection." Dumbledore rose to his feet, his face becoming graver as he crossed the room to his pensive, absently gazing into the swirling basin. "The mission I am undertaking will help sabotage Voldemort's chances of revival once he is finally slain," he said simply. Ramsay flinched in response to the Dark Lord's name, but otherwise remained stoic. "Revival," he recurred lowly. "You mean the way he came back the last time?" Dumbledore nodded. "So long as Voldemort," Ramsay flinched again, "can keep coming back, no student is safe. Harry will never be safe." Ramsay's eyes narrowed. "So this is about you protecting Harry?" he demanded, his tone betraying some surprise and sympathy despite himself. "Keeping him from facing you-know-who?" Dumbledore looked at Ramsay sadly. "Alas, Gordon, I'm afraid nothing will prevent that," he murmured. Ramsay's mouth fell open in furious disbelief. "WH. Of course it could be prevented, are you daft?" he retorted angrily. "Harry might be a capable student, but he's no match for you-know-who. He's just a boy. You can't be stupid enough to think that Harry could take down the most powerful dark wizard in the world just because of some rumors about a blasted prophecy." "You're right," said Dumbledore lightly. "I don't think that just because of the prophecy." Ramsay stared at Dumbledore for a moment. His sharp eyes slowly widened. "Then there is a prophecy." "Yes, Gordon, there is," Dumbledore replied calmly, as he withdrew his wand from the inside of his robes. He poked the liquidy remnants in the pensive with his wand. Out of the basin came a bizarre echo of words, clearly recollected in its depth as a murky face swam around it. "Neither can live while the other survives." Ramsay looked down at the pensive, trying to catch a better look at the face, but it was already fading away, and the sound had stopped. Then his eyes shot back up to Dumbledore and narrowed accusingly. "Does Harry know about this?" "Yes," said Dumbledore. "I told him after the Death Eaters tried to steal it from the Department of Mysteries last year. It was time that he knew. So now you've coaxed Harry into thinking he has to fight, who, just because of some shite prophecy," snarled Ramsay. "That's low even for you, Dumbledore. You fucking—" "I've not coaxed him any such way," Dumbledore said gravely, his misty tone hinting at just enough sharpness to interrupt Ramsay and no more. The headmaster's wrinkled, long-fingered hand slid along the edge of the pensive. "As with all prophecies, Harry's only holds as much value as one gives it," he said quietly. "And Harry is wise enough to have realized that he alone, and no prophecy, can dictate his fate." He is also wise enough to realize that he is the chosen one not because he was chosen by fate or destiny, but because Voldemort, Ramsay fought back another flinch, chose to target the Potters, and therefore designated Harry as his greatest foe. And because Harry is such a noble boy, such a brave man, he will not hide or cower when faced with such a threat, not when it endangers the people he loves most in the world. If Harry doesn't have a choice, it's merely because there is no other choice that he himself could in good conscience make. Ramsay opened his mouth to speak, but Dumbledore gently cut him off with a raised hand. Subconsciously, he'd raised his black and injured hand, which halted the words in Ramsay's throat almost immediately when he laid eyes on it. Dumbledore, feeling some compassion in response to Ramsay's horror, shook his sleeve over his injured hand and lowered it again gracefully. "I know I've wronged you in the past, Gordon," he said softly. "When you were a boy, I tried to persuade you, both myself and through your friends, to aid in our cause. You were such a brilliant young student, one that I knew could be so beneficial to our cause, that I looked past your feelings and wishes in an attempt to recruit you. I exploited your trust in me as an authority figure and used it to coax you to join the Order without giving you the chance to come to your own conclusions, and for that I'm sorry." Dumbledore's words sounded so sincere that they were almost painful to hear. How much that apology would have meant just 3 years ago, but right now, Ramsay felt his hands clenching at his sides with anger. "Yet you're still coaxing more children to fight once they've graduated," he challenged him sharply. "Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Harry, you can't tell me you don't expect them to jump into the fight, just like James and Lily and Alice did, and look at what fucking happened to them. You haven't learned a bloody thing, have you?" Dumbledore's eyes widened just slightly, then they softened with something like pity. "You truly love those children." "No shit, you brainless donkey," scoffed Ramsay loudly. "Katie nearly died thanks to that cursed necklace. Ron got poisoned so badly that he was almost permanently paralyzed. Draco has clearly been pressured to join the Death Eaters after school, and I'm sure Vincent, Gregory, Millicent, and Daphne will soon be approached too. They're being pulled into this goddamn war from both sides, and instead of protecting them, you've just sat back and fucking let it happen. All the students at this school, all of them, deserve better than this. But I suppose I shouldn't have expected someone as fucking brain-dead as you to understand that. After all, who cares what casualties we suffer or how many families get ripped apart? As long as we win the bloody war, it's all for the greater fucking good, isn't it, you mewling, heartless harpy?" Dumbledore smiled slightly, but even that smile was tinged with the same bizarre sorrow that so troubled Ramsay. "Gordon, your compassion is truly limitless. To care so deeply for these children, many of whom are just as flawed as the adults who have raised them, and who they'll likely eventually emulate, to see yourself in every single one of them, however different they might be, that is a singularly impressive feat. I could only dream of possessing such a strong heart, one who can bring out friendships where there were once rivalries, and who can show such astounding mercy for someone who has yet to earn it. But alas, my heart is too old, battered, and bruised to ever grow to such a size. There was a point, I must confess, where I hesitated in contacting you for the position of potions professor. Now I see how very right the decision truly was, after all." With this, he walked back to his desk, leaving Ramsay stunned into silence. After a moment, Dumbledore turned back to look at the potions professor. "After all these years, I know that you would never fight for me, but—" "For Harry, surely, for all of Hogwarts, would you fight Voldemort?" Ramsay flinched at the name, though less this time. He didn't reply for a long minute. When he finally opened his mouth to speak again, he was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Enter," said Dumbledore. The door opened, to reveal Harry on the other side of it. He looked up at Ramsay, startled by his presence. "Hello, Harry," Dumbledore said pleasantly. "Gordon and I were just finishing up. Gordon, if you would excuse us, please." Ramsay looked from Dumbledore to over at Harry, his sharp blue eyes wary. His gaze lingered on Harry's face, as if silently searching for an explanation that never appeared. Finally, with another quick glance toward Dumbledore's desk, Ramsay left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. About 10 minutes later, Harry ran up to the Gryffindor common room to fetch his invisibility cloak. While there, he took the remaining half of his Felix Felicis out of his suitcase and gave it to Ron, instructing him and Hermione to split it amongst themselves and Ginny, and contact the rest of the DA if anything went wrong that night. About 30 minutes after Harry and Dumbledore had left, Draco Malfoy disobeyed curfew and sneaked out of the Slytherin common room without anyone noticing. About an hour and a half after Harry and Dumbledore had left, the students and teachers were all settled in bed when the first rounds of small explosions woke them up from their slumber. Chapter 58. The Battle of the Lightning-Struck Tower. Chapter text. The only person who moved a muscle during that first minute was the castle caretaker, Argus Filch. He'd heard the disturbance coming from the fifth-floor corridor, which was just upstairs from where he'd been making his usual evening rounds. Grumbling about Peeves and his theatrical pranks, Filch lurched up the staircase, Mrs. Norris at his heels, to investigate the noise. As soon as he arrived at the landing, however, he was abruptly thrown backward, colliding sharply with the wall headfirst. Wood splinters, pieces of stone, and an unpleasant yellow-green acid fell around him, and dust was thrust up into the air. A shriek of insane laughter echoed down the hall. Filch shook his throbbing head, trying desperately to stabilize his vision, and when he looked through the dusty air, he was horrified to discover the source of the wicked glee. 3 menacing, black-cloaked figures had come out into the hallway, wands drawn. A tall, statuesque woman with long, curly, dark hair and a mad gleam in her eye stood proudly at the front of the group. "Find him," she told the others. "Blast open this school until he comes running." She laughed again as she raised her wand, waving it violently at one of the walls and ripping it down. The stone went flying, shattering apart as if it were made of glass. Despite the pain he was in, Filch immediately thought of his beloved pet. Lunging forward, he grabbed the pitifully mewing Mrs. Norris off the floor and then scrambled back down the stairs. He needed to find cover to get help. Within the second minute, there was movement in the teachers' chambers. All of them quickly leapt out of bed and hurried to discover the source of the commotion. Professor Burbage found out by running into Argus Filch in the fourth-floor corridor. Professor Sprout found out when the fat friar floated down through the ceiling of her office and told her of the attack. 2 of the teachers, Professors Sinistra and Flitwick, found out by colliding with Bellatrix head-on. In seconds, the whole thing devolved into a full-on wizard's duel in the fifth-floor corridor. Flitwick fought valiantly, but the former dueling champion found himself struggling against Bellatrix even with Sinistra's help, and soon they were forced back down the hallway, struggling and failing to hold their ground. Not long later, Professor McGonagall arrived, just as another Death Eater, Thorfinn Roll, joined Bellatrix's side. Professors Vector and Ramsay ran into each other on their way down the fifth-floor corridor. Both of them had their wands drawn, and their faces were very pale. "Gordon," whispered Vector as they dashed down the hallway together. You don't think?" Ramsay knew what Vector was thinking, but he just couldn't fathom it. Death Eaters at Hogwarts, the safest place on Earth, that resilient fortress with constant aura protection and impenetrable shields conjured by Dumbledore himself. Bang! All of a sudden, the 2 professors were thrown backward off their feet when the wall to their left exploded in a blast of yellow-green acid. Within the 3rd minute, there were some small traces of movement in the student dorms. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger, following the instructions Harry had left them, each took a gulp of the Felix Felicis before leaving the rest on Ginny's bedside table and rushing downstairs, wands drawn. Hector Summerby instructed the Hufflepuff prefects who'd woken up to keep everyone inside their common room while he found Professor Sprout. In the hallway, he collided with her, who instructed him to make sure the rest of the teachers were informed of the attack before returning to his dormitory. Eddie Carmichael reassured the Ravenclaw prefects that he'd go outside and find out what was going on. Unfortunately, not long after he reached the base of the stairs, the newly arrived Rabastion Lestrange confronted Carmichael, and the 2 immediately started to duel, with Carmichael trying desperately to lead Lestrange away from his common room. In the Slytherin dungeons, everyone was restless. Without being ordered, all of them had come down to the common room, their dressing robes on and their wands out, as they all alertly watched the wall that hid the entrance, waiting for Professor Snape or another teacher to arrive with information and reassurance. But no one came. While Bellatrix Lestrange and her companions started ripping apart the school, a white cat slipped away down the hall, unseen by everyone. The Felix Felicis was going to wear off soon, but he had a feeling he knew what to do to get Dumbledore to come to him. Within the 5th minute, there were injuries. The Ravenclaws got a horrible fright when Professor Ramsay made his way into their common room, supporting a badly injured Professor Vector. "Is there anyone here who knows healing?" he demanded, his voice clearly strained with desperation and urgency. Vector's arm had been blasted clean off. She was covered in blood, and sickly yellow-green acid caked the stump that had once been her right shoulder. After a few seconds of stunned silence, Astoria dashed forward out of the fold, rushing over to help support Vector as she crumpled to the floor. "Don't touch the acid," Ramsay told Astoria sharply. The two eased the arithmancy professor down onto one of the couches. Vector tried desperately to keep her composure, but her face was shining with sweat, and she could not hold back the silent tears of pain that ran down her cheeks like tiny rivers. "We need towels and cold water," Ramsay barked over his shoulder. Marietta Edgecombe ran to fetch them. Ramsay reached into his robes and took out a rectangular blue bottle, and he turned to Astoria urgently. "Astoria, this is essence of Dittany," he said. "Do you know it?" "Yes, sir," said Astoria. Her voice was very soft and shaky, but confident. "Good, the acid from the Death's Head shell is trying to eat through the skin, see? We need to stop that fast. Apply the Dittany to the burns every 30 seconds, promptly, do you understand? Keep applying it even after the acid dissolves. Don't stop until you're sure the pain's stopped." "Okay, okay," Astoria whispered. Her throat was very dry. Marietta arrived with the towels and a pail of cold water. Ramsay immediately grabbed a small towel, soaking it in the water and then squeezing it dry before he applied it to Vector's forehead. "Keep an eye on her temperature," he said. "If her forehead's warm to the touch, use cold water compresses to keep her cool. Are you going to be okay?" Astoria nodded. "That's a good girl," murmured Ramsay, squeezing her shoulder supportively. He looked down at Vector, who was blinking up through her sweat and tears at him. "Hang in there, Septima. I'll find Poppy and bring her upstairs." Ramsay got to his feet and headed for the door. "Professor," said Cho, "please, what's going on?" Ramsay turned to her solemnly. "There are Death Eaters in the castle," he said very quietly. The students all reacted in shock. Arjuna, who had been sitting in an armchair since she was too feverish and dizzy to stand, went very white. "I need you all to fortify the common room," Ramsay told them urgently. "I know the Death Eaters are not generally known for their intellect, but Gibbon's out there, and he was once a Ravenclaw, so he'll know where your common room is. A riddle might not be enough protection." With this, he swept out of the room. Meanwhile, Flitwick found Professor Snape downstairs and told him of the battle. The two headed back up the staircase, with only one of the two aware of what the Death Eaters' arrival really meant. Within the 6th minute, the DA coins Hermione had made had started to burn. Neville had had his on his bedside table and noticed the date change when he was sitting on his bed. He ran into Ginny on the stairs. She'd already found the bottle of Felix Felicis and the short note Hermione had left her a moment before. Luna Lovegood, who always kept the coin in her pocket, bolted past the growing barricades inside the Ravenclaw common room into the hallway without hesitation, her golden Snidget-printed dressing gown flapping behind her like a cape. Terry Boot then urged the remaining Ravenclaw DA members, Padma Patil, Michael Corner, Anthony Goldstein, and Cho Chang, after her. Cho gave Marietta a huge hug before leaving her and the other prefects in charge of the common room. Hannah Abbott and Susan Bones had just finished helping the 7th-year prefects assemble the underclassmen together in the common area. Owen Caldwell had been particularly difficult to wake. When Ernie Macmillan ran over to them, his dark eyes very wide and urgent. "Hannah, Susan," he held up his DA coin. Shining red-hot along the edges was the date. June 30, 1997, 11:21 p.m. Susan, and Hannah's eyes grew wide as well. "There's a meeting right now," Susan whispered. The three looked at each other in horrified realization. The DA had taught them how to fight the dark arts. If there was a meeting tonight, after an entire year of silence, on a night when everyone was woken up by a series of explosions, that had to mean that Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the rest of the DA were fighting upstairs at that very moment. "We have to get up there," Hannah said anxiously. "But what about the underclassmen?" whispered Ernie, glancing around at the mob of students gathered in the common room. "We're needed here to look after them," Summerby said. It was clear as he said it, though, that his loyalties were split between his house and Dumbledore's army. "Ernie, we can't let them fight on their own," Hannah murmured urgently. "The other prefects can protect the common room. No one will be able to get in, with how hidden our entrance is. But Ernie, if our friends are out there, we have to help them." Ernie nodded decisively. "You're right. Come now, let's go, before anyone has the chance to stop us." The three pushed through the crowd, dashing over to the common room's exit as fast as they could. Within 7 minutes, the Order of the Phoenix had arrived. Soon Ron and Susan were fighting alongside Kingsley Shacklebolt, while Terry Boot and Ginny fought side by side with Fleur de Lacquer. Snape recruited Luna and Hermione to watch over an unconscious Flitwick while he returned to the battle. Hannah tried to keep Ernie and Susan in sight as they joined the fray, but within seconds they were separated by the scuffle of flares and spells. She dived behind a wall, conjuring the best shield charm she could to deflect the hexes being blasted at her from the other side. She was so focused on blocking spells, she didn't have enough time to react when a death's head shell blew apart the ceiling over her head. Hannah involuntarily hunched down, ducking and covering. "Pratigo!" Hannah raised her head. Neville Longbottom had lunged forward, raising his wand high and conjuring a shield charm over both of them. The yellow-green acid-laced stone bounced off as if it were made of rubber, colliding with the ground with a smash. Hannah looked up at Neville with a shaky smile. "Thanks," she breathed weakly. His round face faintly flushed. Neville reached out a hand to help Hannah to her feet. A moment later, however, they immediately had to raise their wands again and defend themselves against another onslaught of spells. Roll shot bright green killing curses in every direction, blasting open walls and slamming chandeliers to the floor. Just as he was about to reach Neville and Hannah, however, a spell from behind collided with his shoulder, making his wand fly out of his hand. Remus Lupin, looking even gaunter than usual, barreled down the hallway, coming to a stop between Neville and Hannah. "Are you two all right?" he asked them, his soft voice urgent. "Yes, Professor," Neville and Hannah said together, both thrilled by the sight of him. Hannah was the first to notice Rabastion Lestrain coming to Roll's aid, raising his wand. "Pratigo!" she cried. Her shield blocked his black spell just in time, rebounding it back against the wall and leaving a sizzling burn. Within 8 minutes the Slytherins had enough. "No one's coming," said Richard Thorne sharply. "Professors must be busy dealing with everything upstairs," said the head girl, a seventh-year boy with blonde hair named Julian Montmorency, trying to mask his concern. "If that's the case," said Tracy Davis matter-of-factly, "we needn't do anything." Another loud burst of sound upstairs made everybody flinch. "We at least need to know what's going on," said Raw Harper, the Slytherin seeker. "We can't just be expected to sit here quietly until the professors remember to keep us in the loop." "You first, then, Harper," said Zabini scornfully. "Yeah, after this last Quidditch season, you're bound to be no great loss," sneered a Slytherin third year called Rackham. The other Slytherins devolved into angry muttering. "Silence, all of you." Everyone abruptly quieted as Daphne Greengrass took a step forward, glaring around at everyone with the most condescending of stares. "Roy is right about one thing," she said softly. "We do need information. So unless we all want to draw lots on who will go upstairs, someone better come up with some other way we can get it." Everyone stewed in silence for a few seconds. Then Millicent Bulstrode straightened up slightly, opened her mouth, and spoke very loudly and clearly. "Winky!" Crack! The other Slytherins flinched slightly when the house elf appeared in the middle of the room. Winky blinked up at Millicent, her long lashes fluttering over her large, dark eyes. "You called, Miss Millicent?" "Yes," said Millicent lowly. "Winky, I need you to go upstairs and find out what's going on. Don't let anyone see you, and come straight back here as soon as you know." Winky gave a slightly nervous but firm little nod. "Yes, miss." Crack. As the 10-minute mark approached, the Ravenclaws solidified their barricade. Marietta rushed around the common room, dictating instructions to the rest of the students. She knew she had to keep her classmates moving. If there was one thing a Ravenclaw hated more than anything, it was feeling ineffectual or useless. So the only way to keep sanity in the room was to keep everyone busy with activity. Marietta looked out the window at the grounds. It was pitch black. The only light came from the lightning storm that illuminated everything sharply with flares of white. The Aurors had to be out there. There was no disturbance outside. So the Death Eaters must have somehow gotten in without them knowing, and if the explosions were all inside, they might not even know what was happening. We need to alert the auras, she told the others. Everyone gather together, anything combustible, filibuster, fireworks, dung bombs, matches, anything that'll burn. We'll make a signal from our window. The students all rushed up to their dorms to gather materials. Marietta moved over to Astoria and Arjuna, who were now both sitting on the floor beside the wounded Professor Vector. "How is she?" Marietta asked Astoria. Vector gave a weak whimper in her sleep. Astoria's face was very pale as she dabbed some more dittany to the professor's shoulder with a towel. "Not good," the fourth year murmured. "The dittany's working, but it's slow. I'm trying to keep her top half elevated to help with blood flow, but her fever's getting worse." Storia soaked another towel in the cold water, wiping Vector's forehead clean of sweat. Arjuna, despite being quite feverish herself, still moved to help Astoria, materializing more cold water out of her wand to fill the pail. "Marietta," Arjuna whispered, her hoarse voice marred with unease. "When you send the message to the auras, can you please tell them to go to the astronomy tower?" Marietta and Astoria both blinked. "I know it sounds crazy," Arjuna said shakily, "but please tell them. I have a really bad feeling about the tower. Tonight." Astoria's blue eyes narrowed in concern upon Arjuna. Marietta looked from Arjuna to Astoria before nodding solemnly. "Okay." Marietta hurried back upstairs to check in with the other students. "Arjuna," murmured Astoria. Arjuna leaned back against the side of the couch and closed her eyes, but she appeared no less anxious. The dream that had kept her up night after night and had left her feeling so ill depicted a tower struck by lightning. Towers, in fortune-telling, generally foretold destruction. A minute after she'd left, Winky returned to the Slytherin common room looking very shaken. She collapsed to the ground, clutching her forearms in terror. "Winky," said Millicent, bending down beside her to make sure she wasn't hurt. Winky looked up at Millicent, her dark eyes very wide, before the elf reached out and clutched the front of Millicent's black dressing gown. "Miss Millicent," she cried desperately. "Miss Millicent, there is dark wizards in the school. There is Death Eaters inside Hogwarts," the Slytherin common room filled with an array of gasps. "There is so much fighting, Miss Millicent," whimpered Winky. "Professors and students, all fighting and dueling." Winky almost got flattened when the ceiling caved in. "The dark wizards has Death's head shells." Bridget rushed over, bending down next to Millicent and Winky. "You said there were students out there," she said urgently. "Who, Winky?" Winky's lip trembled. A.R. Ravenclaw boy Winky didn't know, the N-New-H head boy. "Summerby," supplied Bridget. Montmorency went visibly paler at the mention of his counterpart. Winky nodded fearfully. "And there was Miss Abbott, and Master Weasley." Bridget's face blanched. In a violent move, she shot to her feet and ran across the room. Montmorency quickly stepped in front of the wall that covered the entrance to the common room to try to cut her off. "Jahim, wait," he barked. But Bridget didn't even give him the dignity of an argument. Instead, she just whipped out her wand and pointed it right at him without breaking out of her run. Avert sacked him. With a blast of white light, Montmorency was blasted clean off his feet, and Bridget ran past him through the opening wall, her oversized purple dressing gown flapping behind her. Montmorency quickly stumbled back to his feet just as the wall slid shut. "Just let her go," sneered Pansy. "She's not worth protecting." Montmorency looked over his shoulder at Pansy, and everyone else in the common room gave a great flinch when they saw just how dangerous of a glint rippled through his eye. Adjusting his peacock-printed dressing gown, he turned to the others, his ice blue glare as fearsome as some mad wolf as he prowled back into the center of the room. "We've got to fortify this common room," he told them sharply. "This wall alone is not going to keep out the Death Eaters. No one else is leaving this room, not until we can get help." "What do we need help for?" sneered Zabini. "The Death Eaters aren't going to hurt us. They're attacking the school, and we're in it," snapped Montmorency. "And in case you've forgotten, Zabini, most of the Death Eaters were once Slytherins, so they know where our common room is. A password isn't going to keep them out if they want in." "But," Thorne said quietly, "you're a pureblood." Montmorency turned to the first year. His gaze was much less cruel but no less reproachful. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am pureblood, or at least close enough to it. But as far as this school and my parents are concerned, I'm your head girl, aren't I?" The others all hushed. Montmorency turned around, staring them all down in turn. "Let's be frank here. The Death Eaters are not just going to put targets on the backs of Muggleborns or half-bloods or half-breeds or squibs. If they only cared about blood, would they really have recruited Fenrir Greyback? Alp Hunts Gibbon. My father, who is so close to being a squib, it was a shock that he made it into Hogwarts. No, they don't care about blood, they care about loyalty, and who will get them their so-called perfect world full of pureblood babies. Do you really think they'd be okay with any purebloods who didn't want to have children? Any who deviated from the gender they were assigned at birth? Or who had sexual preferences that would contradict their vision of a husband and wife and 7 kids? Do you really think they'd be okay with anyone who would choose their safety or their family's safety over their precious cause? Do you really think they'd be okay with anyone who might want to do things other than marry someone just for their blood? Do you really think they'd be okay with anyone talking back to them or contradicting any little thing that came out of their mouths? Many of the other Slytherins exchanged anxious looks. Although there were a few like Zabini, Crabbe, Goyle, and Pansy who were ignorant enough to be unperturbed, others like Tracy suddenly looked a little less confident. Millicent and Daphne glanced at each other out the corner of their eye. "Don't be stupid enough," said Montmorency solemnly, "to think that magical blood could shield you from a death's head shell or a killing curse, let alone keep you out of the war. The Death Eaters are bullies. When they succeed in taking out their victims, they'll immediately go looking around for new ones, and those new ones could be you. After all, even if you are somehow the most perfect specimen doesn't that then make you the perfect foot soldier for the Death Eaters to put on the front lines." Montmorency raised his wand, levitating a couch to sit in front of the wall that covered the common room entrance. "Winky," he told the house elf, "go to Hogsmeade and get help. The rest of you, let's block off this wall and try to get our hands on some flue powder in case we need to evacuate." 13 minutes after the attack began, the Ravenclaw's fireworks started blasting off from the tower, creating exclamation points and arrows pointing toward the astronomy tower. The Auras all rushed to the castle, Nymphadora Tonks in the lead. Meanwhile, inside, Ron and Susan ran deeper into the school, trying to secure the Death Eater's point of entry. With a little help from the Felix Felicis he'd taken, Ron led Susan to the 5th-floor corridor and the room of requirement. Once they'd figured out the right question to ask, they found themselves in the room where everything is hidden, and found a vanishing cabinet not unlike the one Harry had mentioned seeing in Nocturne Alley. Not long after they arrived, Death Eater Etienne Montmorency stepped out of it, and Ron and Susan were immediately thrown into a 3-way duel with the much older man. When Susan finally got the upper hand and subdued the man by hexing his lips together and then stunning him, the two rushed over to the cabinet. "Bombardment spell on 3, said Ron. Susan nodded firmly. 1, 2, 3. Bombarder, they cried together. The cabinet imploded with a loud crash, the door flying off its hinges and landing somewhere in a junk pile several yards away. "That'll keep them from getting reinforcements," Ron said triumphantly. 15 minutes after the attack began, the dark mark appeared over the astronomy tower. By that point, the Auras had arrived inside the castle and had joined the Order members, teachers, and students in fighting the small batch of Death Eaters. Hermione wordlessly shielded the unconscious Flitwick from a swath of magical fire, and Tonks came to Lupin's rescue when Yaxley tried to hit him with a killing curse. Eddie Carmichael had just about made it down to the ground level when he collided with Bill Weasley on the staircase, just in time for Bill to shield him from another Death's Head shell explosion. "Thanks for that," said Carmichael genially. Bill grinned. "No problem." At that very moment, someone shot forward so abruptly he was like a blur, landing on Bill and flattening him to the ground, tearing at his clothes with his teeth like a mad animal. It was Fenrir Greyback. Barely having any time to think, Carmichael angrily and wordlessly summoned the beastly man toward him just enough that he could throw Greyback into the opposite wall. Carmichael ran over to Bill. The eldest Weasley's face and torso was covered with deep gashes and blood, and he seemed to be momentarily stunned. "Hey," hissed Carmichael, as he hurried to bring an arm around Bill to pick him up. "Hey, stay with me now, don't conk out." A horrible snarl came up from behind him. Carmichael whirled around to see Fenrir Greyback lunging straight for them. Bam! Out of nowhere, Ramsay had lunged forward and punched the werewolf right in the jaw, knocking him backward. The suddenness and physicality of the attack threw Greyback off and gave Carmichael just enough time to stabilize his grip on his wand and stun him. "Professor," gasped Carmichael in relief. Ramsay ran over to help Carmichael support Bill. "Come on," he said urgently. "Let's get him somewhere safe." 18 minutes had passed, and the battle still raged on. Bridget caught up with Ginny, and the two took on Gibbon until he was taken out by a stray killing curse cast by Roll. Hannah and Neville fought against Yaxley, beating him back up the hallway and away from the hospital wing where Ramsay had delivered some of the injured. Bellatrix had slashed Ernie across the face with a knife-like spell, but the Hufflepuff prefect blinked the blood and pain out of his eyes and tried to chase after her as she plowed down the hallway, smashing the Gryffindor point hourglass as she went. In the Hufflepuff common room, the underage students sat and waited, all huddled together on the floor and in cozy chairs, for the storm to clear. The prefects, excluding Ernie and Hannah, stood in front of the tunnel that was the entrance to the common room, wands drawn in a protective stance. Owen had brought together his friends in a tight-knit clump on the floor by the fireplace. Malcolm Preece and Tamsin Appleby sat to Owen's left, while Gregory Munslow sat on his stomach on the floor just in front of him. Owen kept an arm around Alina, who was shaking visibly, in an attempt to comfort her. It was as they sat that Owen spotted Rose pacing the room anxiously in the back. "Rose," Owen called over. Rose looked up. Although she didn't look afraid exactly, she did look a bit on edge. Owen silently gestured for her to come sit next to him, his dark face touched by a small smile. Despite her nerves that made her reluctant to sit down, Rose uneasily walked over and settled herself slowly onto the spot Owen had indicated. As soon as she sat down, Owen immediately brought his other arm around her and squeezed her close to his side too. The group sat in silence for a minute, but Rose seemed to be having trouble relaxing. She kept adjusting her legs and arms uncomfortably. "You okay?" murmured Owen. Rose huddled in on herself unhappily, her eyes drawn to the floor. "It's too quiet. Things aren't supposed to be this quiet. It just feels like there's no movement, no life, like you're useless." Owen's eyes softened. He knew how she felt if the prefects hadn't been guarding the portrait hole to make sure the underclassmen didn't run out into the fray. He likely would have gone out there too. He hated the thought of Hannah, Ron, and the others being out there alone. Securing his arm around her, Owen fell into silence. Then, after a moment of thinking, he opened his mouth and started to hum a tune badly under his breath. "Can you dance like a hippogriff? Ma 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 ma, flying off from a cliff. Ma 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 ma." His friends looked up at him, perplexed. Rose in particular looked very confused. Owen gave her a small, unabashed smile. "You said it was too quiet," he said, his down-to-earth voice sounding almost like it was vocally shrugging. "I can't help with the activity, but at least I can fix the sound problem." Rose found her mouth spreading wide into a grin despite herself. "You're so weird," she said amusedly. Owen's smile broadened slightly. "Just following in your shoes, I guess." From that point on, when the room got too quiet, Rose and Owen would take turns badly humming something to the rest of the group. And as strange as it sounded, all of the Hufflepuffs in the common room found some solace in the silly tunes that would flutter through the air. Meanwhile, upstairs, the 11 Death Eaters swarmed around the base of the astronomy tower like a hive of bees. They knew up there, somewhere, was the sniveling boy who the Dark Lord had selected to complete their mission. By the time the attack was 20 minutes old, a wall of Death Eaters had blocked off the astronomy tower. Bellatrix was making her way up the stairs with about 4 others, while the remaining 6 stayed behind and held the boundary. Out of nowhere, Severus Snape ran through the melee and right through the barrier as if it were only made of mist. At the top of the astronomy tower, 2 figures, one small and pointing his wand with a trembling hand, and the other tall, ghostly, and faintly hunched over, exchanged words that only one other unseen soul ever heard. 22 minutes after the attack first began, the task was done. At the sight of an unknown body falling from the astronomy tower, the 10 citizens of Hogsmeade who'd come to help ran up the grounds to create a barrier around the school, Hagrid alongside them. The Death Eaters blasted through the Order members, Aurors, students, and teachers in an attempt to leave the school, as they could no longer go back out the way they came in. Thanks to the many reinforcements, however, The Death Eaters' ranks were soon divided, with every member out for himself. Fenrir Greyback and Etienne Montmorency had already been stunned. Gibbon was dead, and soon Alecto and Amicus Caro and Rabastion Lestrain fell behind. 25 minutes after the attack first began, Severus Snape, Draco Malfoy, and the remaining 6 Death Eaters confronted the Hogsmeade reinforcements on the Hogwarts grounds. Madame Rasmuter courageously took on Rodolphus Lestrange, while Madame Puddifoot successfully wrangled Yaxley. The weedy black-bearded owner of Gladrag's wizardware even managed to hold off Roll with nothing but tickling charms. Snape wordlessly disarmed 2 Zonko's employees at the same time before he heard Harry's voice ringing out in the distance. Coward! His black eyes narrowing upon the dark-haired boy running toward him, the former Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher thrust his hand into Draco's back, shoving him forward violently. Go! He roared, as he wordlessly deflected Harry's Levicorpus spell. Antonin Dolohov snatched Draco up harshly by the collar, yanking him along after him as he disapparated. The entire nightmare had only lasted 26 minutes. By the time it was over, 30 people were wounded. 9 out of the 12 Death Eaters who'd originally broken into the castle were captured, and 1 had been killed, and Hagrid's hut had almost been burned to the ground. Not long after the dust had settled, the worst news of all began to travel around the school on the transparent lips of the school ghosts, burying itself harshly into the unsuspecting backs of every student and teacher as if it were a dagger. Albus Dumbledore was dead. Chapter 59, Saying Goodbye. Chapter text: The news broke when Ginny led Harry to the hospital wing to meet up with the Order of the Phoenix. There were quite a few wounded students and teachers inside. Most of the order was crowded around Bill Weasley's bed by the center window. Professor Vector was resting several beds down with Ramsay and Burbage sitting on either side of her. Harry told McGonagall and the others about what had happened up at the top of the astronomy tower, Dumbledore and him arriving to investigate the Dark Mark, Draco's confession, and Snape's betrayal, and everyone reacted with horror and grief. Everyone except Ramsay. When Ramsay first heard the words, "Dumbledore is dead," he turned away, soaking a cloth with some water and dabbing it against Vector's temple to keep himself occupied. He seemed remarkably composed, but no matter what Burbage said to him, Ramsay didn't reply. Finally, once the story had come out and the Order members had started to cry and assign themselves blame, Ramsay seemed to have heard enough. Rising to his feet, he rather purposefully walked out of the hospital wing, right past Harry and the Order members without looking at them, and closed the door behind him with a sharp snap. Later, Harry found Ramsay outside the hospital wing, sitting on the edge of a windowsill and looking out onto the grounds. The remnants of the lightning storm outside flared through the windows, sharply illuminating his white robes and casting dark shadows over his square face. "Professor Ramsay." Ramsay looked up at Harry. His face was unusually calm. "Hello, Harry." Harry stepped forward to stand beside the windowsill so they could talk face to face. "You left kind of abruptly," he said uncomfortably. Ramsay gave a small grimace. "Forgive me, Harry. I just really didn't want to listen." Harry lowered himself onto the sill beside Ramsay. "I know how that feels. I mean, when Sirius died, I hated it when people would bring him up to say that he was dead. No, I'm afraid it's not like that," said Ramsay, shaking his head. "It's not the news that upset me. I just didn't want to listen to everyone grieving about it." Harry's eyebrows furrowed. "I'm sorry, Harry. But I knew Dumbledore was going to die, sooner or later. He was a very old man who was constantly putting himself in danger by fighting you-know-who. And well, as much as we've been able to work together pleasantly enough this last year, it doesn't change the fact that Dumbledore and I have a lot of old hatchets in our pasts. His death can't wipe those away." Harry was disgusted by what he was hearing. After being surrounded by so many people who had loved and respected Dumbledore and were so pained by his death, listening to someone speaking about it so callously, so flippantly was insulting. "He was murdered," Harry said angrily. "He didn't just die in his sleep or get killed by Voldemort." He ignored Ramsay's flinch. "He died at the hands of a man he'd trusted." "I said over and over that he should never have forgiven Snape," Ramsay said dully. "You yourself said you didn't understand it." "That isn't the point," yelled Harry. His eyes were stinging with tears. "Obviously Dumbledore was wrong, But you can't just rant about how he should have known better. Dumbledore is dead because of Snape. Him trusting Snape wasn't a weakness. Him believing there was good in Snape may have been a mistake, but it's not something he should be lost his life for. Rams considered Harry for a moment, his sharp blue eyes narrowing in thought. Then he tried to speak more gently, though his face remained so infuriatingly neutral. Harry, I know Dumbledore meant a lot to you. I dare say he was there for you when no one else was, probably encouraged you, counseled you, and behaved like a friend. But you have to understand that Dumbledore was more than that. He was a manipulative, clever man, and you're not the only one he persuaded to join his fight against you-know-who. You're not the only one who was tempted by the idea of fraternity and loyalty. Shut up. Harry got to his feet, his green eyes blazing. I don't understand you. You hate Voldemort, Ramsay flinched. The Death Eaters, those rats over at the Stormer, you know they must be stopped. You know that they must be fought. Yet all you've done from the time you got here is refuse to help. Ramsay's eyes narrowed. There are ways to help besides joining the Order, Harry. Well, it's the Order that needs help. Harry shot back. They've needed help this entire year, and yet all you can do is rant about how dirty Dumbledore is and how he brought his death on himself. I did not say that, Ramsay said, trying to de-escalate the argument, but it didn't work. Dumbledore is not the Order, Harry roared. The Order isn't just his. It's McGonagall's and Lupin's and Tonks's and Kingsley's and the Weasleys and everybody else's. The Order is everyone who has decided to fight Voldemort. Again, Ramsay flinched, and it only served to make Harry angrier. Rather than flinch and hide like a coward, Ramsay remained astonishingly cool in the face of Harry's anger, though his temper was being tried. Harry, not everyone is cut out to be a soldier, he said, forcibly keeping his volume from rising. And contrary to what Dumbledore would have you believe, there are ways to thwart the Death Eaters besides brute force. So says the man who yelled at Slughorn and Bagnalled for refusing to stand up to Cuff's article. Challenged Harry coldly. Guess that was just you getting up on your high horse. It's not like you actually care if anyone gets hurt. Finally, Harry had gone too far. In an instant, Ramsay had stood up and pulled out his wand, but Harry was quicker. On instinct alone, he pointed his wand at Ramsay and cried, Expelliarmus! With a burst of red light, Ramsay was thrown across the hall, landing back first into the wall. His silver-tipped wand flew out of his hand and ended up colliding with a suit of armor on the other end. Time suddenly stopped, all sounds stilling at once. Harry stared, dumbfounded. Ramsay had clearly been trying to fight, to actually cause some damage, and yet a simple disarming spell had catapulted him to the ground. Harry tried imagining McGonagall or Flitwick in the same position, and the image looked absurd. Even Snape had only been taken down by 3 disarming spells being cast in unison, and that was when he was taken off guard. This wasn't Ramsay going easy on him or being taken by surprise. This was incompetence. Incompetence the likes of which Harry hadn't seen since Snape disarmed Lockhart back in second year. Ramsay slowly pulled himself to his feet, his blue eyes a little sharper, and his mouth curled up in an oddly dark smile. Expecting more, were you? He said coolly, raising his hands up to sarcastically present himself. Expecting me to breathe fire and shoot stunning spells out my arse. Sorry to disappoint, but my area of expertise is potions, cooking, organizing and financing and networking, and coming up with extravagant swears on occasion. I never claimed to be a world-class dueling champion like Phileas or a magical prodigy like Minerva. Hell, I never got close to earning an owl in defense against the dark arts when I was at school. Even in the battle, the most assistance I could offer was getting the injured off the battlefield, giving them some basic medical help. I'd lost my wand early on, so I couldn't have dueled even if I'd wanted to. I had to punch that creep Greyback in the face. For crying out loud, Harry was left speechless. It wasn't as though he'd seen Ramsay as perfect. He clearly wasn't. He had a bad temper. He could be ridiculously stubborn. And from day one, he'd refused to get involved in the war at any capacity, and yet also actively condemned any students who had tried to go out and fight in his place. And yet, even with all that, this shook Harry. He'd always imagined Ramsay to stand toe-to-toe with the other teachers, perhaps because of his confidence or even just his aggressive attitude with people he didn't like. But Ramsay was in truth no better than Gilderoy Lockhart when it came to defending himself with magic. Not everyone is a soldier, Harry, Ramsay repeated solemnly as he turned to leave. Dumbledore never learned that, but I'm sure you can. I took this job at Hogwarts to teach potions and to help the students, not fight Dumbledore's battles. You came to Hogwarts to learn, to make friends, to master your magic, not blindly follow whatever bogus prophecy happens to have your name on it. The mention of the prophecy startled Harry back to life. You're right. Ramsay stilled in mid-step. I don't have to blindly follow it, Harry said firmly, and I won't, because the prophecy was self-fulfilling. It said that Voldemort, Ramsay flinched, won't rest while I'm alive and that I won't rest until he's defeated. That's true. I can't act as though Voldemort, another flinch, wouldn't have targeted my mum and dad and me if he hadn't known the prophecy existed. But I know even if I never learned about it, I would never, ever let Voldemort hurt people if I could stop him. Ramsay stood in silence, unable to look at Harry. James and Lily died to save your life, he said, his voice unusually soft. Are you really going to just throw that away? Harry's green eyes flashed. You knew my parents, Professor, he said coldly. Do you really think they want me to hide myself away and leave my friends to fight Voldemort on their own? Ramsay seemed to have trouble conjuring up a response. Harry, however, was too aggravated to give him time to gather his thoughts. Instead, he just turned and walked away up the closest staircase. All of Hogwarts mourned the loss of the school's headmaster. The gloom that settled down over the grounds was insurmountable. It felt as though the stars themselves had been shaken and that the ground itself was suddenly insubstantial. If Albus Dumbledore could die, if Albus Dumbledore could be killed by one of his own professors, thanks to the efforts of one of his own students, how bright could the world possibly be? How much hope could possibly still exist in the world? It was decided that Dumbledore's funeral would be held at Hogwarts the following week, and the students would be allowed to attend before returning home on the Hogwarts Express. Many other guests arrived over the course of the day, including the headmistress of Beauxbatons, Madame Maxime, the bass singer for the Weird Sisters, Darnag and Tremlett, and the Minister of Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour. Harry also noticed sourly that both Dolores Umbridge and Rita Skeeter were in attendance, no doubt out of formality rather than any actual grief, and he purposefully avoided them. He was in no mood to deal with them, not on that day, not after what had happened. Harry sat next to Ginny, with Hermione, Ron, Luna, and Bridget beside them. After Malfoy had been exposed as the leak into Hogwarts, the student body came to the conclusion that Bridget probably hadn't poisoned Ron after all and had been significantly nicer to her again. As much as Harry felt frustrated that no one had believed him sooner, he just didn't have the strength or desire to put that frustration into words. The emotions that raged through him left him feeling empty and exhausted, as though a horrible storm had ripped apart his entire being. One person missing from the funeral, however, was Ramsay. As the ceremony began and he scanned the guests in black robes sitting around him, Harry couldn't see the potions professor anywhere, and it left a burning resentment rumbling in the pit of his stomach. The funeral itself was predictably somber and formal. Most everyone was crying throughout the Merpeople's musical performance and the rather stilted eulogy. Harry found himself tuning out during much of it. Everything seemed so dreary, so cold, and Dumbledore had never been cold. He was warm and witty and wise, and as much as Harry felt so much grief about his death, it almost felt odd to pay respects to such a man with a grandiose, plodding lament. As the eulogy came to a close, a young man stepped forward onto the stage, a pale yellow and black guitar on a strap around his neck and shoulder. He was a sharp contrast to the tiny, tufty-haired wizard who performed the eulogy. He was young and perfectly dashing, with black-dyed hair and black eyeliner around his bright blue eyes, and he was dressed in elegant black and violet dress robes that were quite a bit more stylish than the former's drab, conservative threads. He faced the guests gathered before him, his handsome face touched with discomfort as he addressed them. I wrote a song for this, but out of respect for the man himself, I feel that song I wrote isn't the right one to perform, so I'll give you the one I wrote first. He swallowed, his eyes drifting to Dumbledore's body in the casket set up behind him. Hope you like it, Professor, he said very quietly. The young man solemnly started to play a soft chord on his guitar. The fragile notes echoed modestly across the grounds in delicate twangs. Let me sing a tale of a man old and wise. Let me sing a tale of that last big surprise, of the day where he came upon his life's end, and instead of a foe, he found a good friend. The singer's face spread into a smile as the song's tone and tempo shifted. It was no longer solemn. It was gentle and almost light, like a leisurely recollection. His name was Death, scary at first glance. But boy, that guy can dance like no one's watching. He took his hand and got swept away. Now the two shall play, forever botching, decking and checking, eternally wrecking our woe. Here comes the wisdom from their deathly kingdom. Dying's nothing but a show. The crowd sat stock still, dumbfounded. The entire ceremony had been so despondent, so serious, so respectful, that this song seemed almost trivial. It was uncomfortable. The singer didn't seem to notice the reaction, keeping his focus solely on his guitar. His name is Death, scary at first glance, but man, that guy can dance, cut a rug and get down. He took his hand, and he walked on air. Now this funny pair can go paint the town. The singer's voice softened, becoming more pensive and gentle. Strange though it might seem, death is kind. To sleep, perchance to dream, you might find that no nightmare awaits when your life's at its end. And you don't know what wonders lie beyond the bend. Life is like a rendezvous with a dashing bow, so might the afterlife be the lovely afterglow. When we come to our turn, maybe we will have learned to stand tall as he did long ago. The song could have been bad taste. It should have been bad taste. Yet as it went on, Harry felt himself smiling through his tears. This wasn't insensitive at all, it was comforting. Everyone had been so focused on the fact that Dumbledore was gone, never to return. But the man's song was framing the event differently. Yes, Dumbledore had left them, but he was no longer in pain, as he'd been before his death. He had simply gone on, as nearly headless Nick had said after Sirius's death. He was too brave to stay behind as a ghost. And perhaps because of how Harry had last seen the headmaster, weak, trembling, and begging for Snape's mercy in that terrifying, fragile voice. The image of him suddenly being as strong and happy as he'd been in years past was so welcoming. The black-haired singer, despite the smile on his lips, was clearly having trouble keeping it together. His blue eyes were filling with tears as his voice grew louder, more passionate. His name is Death, scary at first glance, yet he'll ask you to dance in the clouds beside him. He took his hand. Death's friend he became. Would you do the same? Could you abide him? His name is Death. When you're called up to dance, will you give him a chance? He didn't wipe away his tears. He let them flow freely as his eyes gained a fierce gleam. His name is Death. Even you know who, yeah, he'll come for you. A silent gasp ran over the spectators, unheard by anyone but felt by all, as the singer's tribute slowly came to an end. His name is Death. When he comes for you, child, don't fear him. Just smile. His name is Death. Just take a breath. His name is Death, your good friend, Death. As the song faded away into nothing, the singer turned to Dumbledore's casket, bringing a hand to his lips and then indicating the air over the headmaster's body. No one spoke, no one moved, not until the singer left the stage, and the ceremony official returned, fighting back his own tears to complete the service. With a burst of ivory flame, Dumbledore's casket was enveloped in a beautiful white marble tomb as the centaurs set loose a dozen arrows over the proceedings, and the merpeople sang another miserable refrain. After the formal service, everyone broke apart, going around to talk with the other guests and grieve openly together. Harry deliberately went to go find the singer, with Ginny, Ron, and Hermione just behind him. He found him talking to Lupin, Tonks, and Terence Goodfellow on the far side. All of them wore black, though Lupin's robes were noticeably threadbare, and Goodfellow's were made of leather and satin. "Excuse me," said Harry. The dashing black-haired man turned around, surprised. "I wanted to tell you how much I liked your song." The singer's face spread into a shy smile. "Thank you," he said. His tone indicated that he was more soft-spoken than his appearance would suggest. "I admit, I was a little nervous at the start. It's not exactly something you'd play at a funeral." "No, but that's why I liked it," said Harry. "Dumbledore wouldn't have wanted everyone to just be sad. He would have wanted us to feel powerful, hopeful. I think Dumbledore would. V really liked what you wrote." The singer's smile grew sadder. "Coming from you, Potter, that means a lot." Goodfellow brought his arm around the man's shoulders, and the tail of his magical snake tattoo curled around his wrist as he squeezed the slightly taller man close to his side. I'm sure Professor Dumbledore would have been proud to know your first performance was for him, too, the blonde-haired reporter said with a wry smile. He always said that you should be more assertive with your work. The singer gave a choked laugh. Evander's written songs for a while, but often behind the scenes as a collaborator, Goodfellow explained to Harry and the others. Saint that he is, he's gotten it into his head that he doesn't want fame and fortune, he just wants to help out his musician buddies. Well, I do, said the man called Evander modestly. It's just the Hufflepuff way, babe. We don't need the spotlight, we need appreciation. You puffball, murmured Goodfellow playfully under his breath. You know you'll always get your fair share of appreciation from me. He placed a light kiss to the side of Evander's chin. Tonks, whose hair was its old shade of pink again despite her black dress robes, smiled at Lupin, and the two squeezed each other's hands. Your lyrics were really well done, Evander, Tonks said kindly. I can tell you put a lot of thought into them. Evander smiled. Thanks, but I can't take all the credit. I couldn't read the Daily Prophet as it was full of obituaries, so I took to reading some of the older editions that Terence had saved, the ones his work was featured in, you know, and there was this editorial written a while back about the Death Eaters and the way the ministries handled them. It just had this wonderful line, we shouldn't simply suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, not when we might take arms against them and end them forever. That's R.J. Moon, said Hermione brightly. He was referencing Hamlet, right? Yes, Evander said eagerly. I looked up the entire speech, and well, it just got me writing. The talk about death being but sleeping and dreaming reminded me of the tale of the three brothers, where death is simply greeted as an old friend, and, well, the rest went from there. It's a great line, agreed Ron, grinning wryly at Lupin. Lupin, however, didn't seem fazed, instead merely smiling at Evander. I believe Professor Dumbledore would have enjoyed the reference. At that moment, Goodfellow brought an arm around his husband's pointedly, bending closer to whisper in his ear. Evander, love, I believe I see Rufus Scrimgeour over there. Might I convince you to accompany me? I guess I can't let you harass him for an interview on your own, Evander sighed airily. He nodded politely to the others. Please excuse us. The two strolled away, Goodfellow leading. It's funny he ended up complimenting you to your face without realizing it, Ginny said to Lupin amusedly. Lupin blinked in confusion. What? R.J. Moon, Ron prompted him. I mean, sure, it's clever, but we all knew it was you. Lupin and Tonks exchanged a glance. Then Lupin turned back to the four with a wry smile. I hate to disappoint you, but I can't take credit for those letters. What? Said Ginny, taken aback. I've been undercover for the whole of a year, living alongside other werewolves who have cut themselves off from the rest of the world, explained Lupin. In those colonies, Owl Post is pretty much non-existent. I was barely able to get away to send any word to the Order, let alone keep up with the Daily Prophet. That's why I was surprised when you brought it up, Ron, said Tonks. It would have hurt Remus's cover if he'd been regularly sending in editorials to the Daily Prophet, and given that he hadn't even sent word to us, it would have been out of character. Don't know who that R.J. Moon person is, but I'll give them credit. They've got a way with words. Lupin's smile softened as the two walked away to go speak with the other guests, leaving the four Gryffindors alone to exchange confused looks amongst each other. I said no comment, a sharp voice barked coldly. But Minister, Goodfellow's voice said persistently, clearly if Azkaban's walls have been breached, the people have a right to know. The Ministry will have its own press release about the matter, and I don't need you shoving your nose in just to make a headline. The first voice snarled. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny all turned around. Scrimgeour, flanked by Umbridge and another employee with a nose as long as his sleek dark hair, was purposefully trying to shake off Goodfellow, who was chasing him across the lawn. Just behind Goodfellow was Evander, who looked a little nervous, but made no move to silence or calm his husband. I may be obnoxious, Minister, but I assure you I do not seek a scandal, said Goodfellow. Even though his face appeared genial, his tone grew harder and harder with every sentence. I simply want to confirm or deny that such a breakout has occurred. If he, who must not be named, forces did or did not attack the facility in an attempt to break out the dark wizards captured after the skirmish at Hogwarts, Harry's heart stopped. But Scrimgeour did not. The ministry will release its findings when the investigation has been completed. But sir, Goodfellow urged him, his eyes now starting to flash. A death's head shell exploded outside the Muggle Prime Minister's office just this morning. If any of those involved in the attack were freed from Azkaban, that death head shell was inexpertly and prematurely detonated before anyone could be hurt. Scrimgeour cut him off sharply. Goodfellow opened his mouth to argue, but Scrimgeour shut him down. I've had enough of your questions. Now leave me be, or I will have a word with Barnabas Cuff about keeping his reporters on a tighter leash. Evander took hold of Goodfellow's arm as the reporter came to a stop, silently watching the minister and his aides leave. Terence, murmured Evander, but Goodfellow shook his head. He won't admit it, he said to his husband quietly, though they were close enough that Harry and the others could still hear him. Who knows how many more Death Eaters could be back out on the streets now? When you put out an article about it, it's no use, Goodfellow grumbled in frustration. I haven't made the front page since my Magic report. Barnabas hasn't liked my articles, and right now the Daily Prophet is only interested in mourning Dumbledore. I know why, he said in upset, when Evander opened his mouth to argue. I'm sad too, but the world doesn't just stop as soon as someone dies. There's stuff going on, but no one wants to hear it. Everyone's numbing themselves because it's all too much, and it hurts too much. Soon nothing we write will mean anything. Evander wrapped his arm around Goodfellow, kissing his cheek as he led him away. Weasley. The four Gryffindors turned to see McGonagall striding up to them. She was dressed in high-necked black dress robes made of velvet, and although her face was very pale, she held herself remarkably well. Professor, started Ron. She looked at all of them solemnly as she took a small package out from the inside of her robes. Professor Ramsay asked me to pass this along to you. I've already given the other to Miss Greengrass. Is Ramsay here? Asked Ginny as Ron took the package. McGonagall pursed her lips, her expression visibly torn between anger and sadness. No, he gave this to me before the ceremony this morning. But said Hermione, looking very upset, but it's Dumbledore's funeral. How could he even think of not coming? He hated Dumbledore, remember, Harry said harshly. He doesn't care that he's gone. Everyone turned to look at him, startled. McGonagall's face then became oddly gentle. No, Potter, he does care, she said quietly, however difficult it might be for Gordon to show it. Regardless of the bad blood between them, Albus was always fond of Gordon, and Gordon knew that full well. Gordon told me that Albus even apologized to him before you two left Hogwarts that night. This startled Harry. He apologized. Yes, I don't believe Gordon forgave him, but Albus did show open regret, said McGonagall solemnly. And as much as Gordon has not grieved for Albus as we have, that doesn't mean he doesn't care. As long as I've known him, Gordon has always had difficulty with grief, even for his friends. He couldn't bear to attend the impromptu funeral the ministry held for Peter Pettigrew, back when we thought he was dead. And when James and Lily died, Gordon didn't visit their graves until long after everyone else had already left. Even now, even with how fond he was of Alice Longbottom while they were at school, he still has yet to visit her. Harry recalled the image of Frank and Alice Longbottom in St. Mungo's, a shadow of their former selves, because of the torture that Bellatrix Lestrange and the Death Eaters had put them through. It had been very difficult to see the pair gliding around the ward like mad ghosts, but Harry considered that it would have to be harder for anyone who actually knew them before they'd been cursed so badly. Even their son Neville, who hadn't but loved them very much, had difficulty talking about them or their condition to anyone. Dumbledore would be wanted Ramsay to be here, Ginny said fiercely. McGonagall surveyed her sadly over her glasses. Yes, sadly this is not the first time that Gordon has had to disappoint Albus. She glanced at Harry one last time, before turning and walking back toward Professors Flitwick and Sprout. With a quick look around at the others, Ron opened the package. Inside were a short note and a huge pile of gold galleons. Ron, here are your earnings for the Magic contest. 5,000 in full. Astoria has got the same amount. You both have thoroughly earned it. I can't act as though the world isn't going to become scarier and soon, but when and if everything gets resolved, you, your family, and your friends will always be welcome at Hell's Kitchen. Stay safe. Gordon Ramsay. Harry knew it would be his last time at Hogwarts. Now that Dumbledore was gone, He was the only one who could hunt down Voldemort's remaining Horcruxes. So as he settled down in a compartment on the Hogwarts Express, he took out the Marauder's map and looked over his old haunts. He looked over each hallway, and he recalled all of the wonderful days and terrifying adventures. That room's where Ferentz's been holding his classes, he thought as he gazed at the map. I wonder if he still has it transfigured to look like it's outside. And over there is where Fred and George put the portable swamp. Even Flitwick said it was really good magic. The library. There Millicent offered to help me with potions, and Ginny brought me a chocolate Easter egg, and I snuck into the restricted section looking for information on the Philosopher's Stone. His eyes found the hallway he'd run down to escape Filch after nearly getting caught in that act, and as he watched the empty hallway, he suddenly felt like he was back under his invisibility cloak, small enough to actually fit under it without crouching. He remembered coming around that hallway, hearing voices, trying to stay super quiet as he listened in on a black-robed, bat-like teacher threatening a smaller man in a purple turban. You don't want me as your enemy, Quirrell. Harry clenched his teeth, his green eyes filling up with angry tears. Back then he'd known Snape was no good. He'd always known Snape was no good, and yet Dumbledore just refused to see it. And now, him believing there was good in Snape may have been a mistake, but it's not something he should be lost his life for. Furious by the memory both of Snape and Ramsay, Harry put down the map, turning to the window. Through the glass he saw Arjuna and Astoria hugging tightly, crying as they looked out upon the Hogwarts grounds together. Arjuna's not coming back. Harry looked up at Ron, who was also looking grimly out the window at the two of them. Her father sent a letter saying her mother's gotten very sick and she'll be staying at home to care for her, Ron said lowly. But Arjuna knows her father only wrote that because the mail's being watched and he probably wants both her and her mum to go into hiding. And Cho's going abroad. She and Marietta were supposed to join the ministry here after graduating. But well, Cho's father was able to transfer to New York City, and he was able to wrangle a work visa for Cho too. Considering what's going on, I don't blame them for not staying, Hermione said softly. You heard what Goodfellow said about that attack outside the Prime Minister's office. It's just lucky the shell went off before that person could get inside. Who knows how many muggles might have died otherwise? Harry's stomach lurched uncomfortably. Astoria's coming back, though. Yeah, she decided she has to risk it to take her owls next year, said Ron. She needs those to get the job she wants, and she would feel bad leaving Daphne behind. And well, even if she's got the money to move out now, she knows that money can't buy a place that keep her safe from the Death Eaters. No amount of money can afford that, Harry nodded glumly, his eyes still lingering on Arjuna and Astoria. They looked heartbroken, and Harry thought, why wouldn't they be? He'd never had to consider spending a whole year at school without Ron or Hermione. Hermione sat down next to Harry and took his hand, her brown eyes drifting down to the Marauder's map in his lap. She then blinked in surprise. Harry, there's someone at Dumbledore's tomb. Startled, Harry scanned the parchment until he found one lone dot by the Black Lake. Gordon Ramsay. So he did decide to go see Dumbledore, thought Harry. He just waited until everyone else had left, like with my mum and dad. He watched the dot for a long moment. Then, folding the Marauder's map and putting it away in his robes, he looked back up at the castle. Who knew when he would see those beautiful towers and the shining lake again? Who knew when he'd walk those halls again? Who knew if he would ever see Hogwarts again? Gordon Ramsay traveled home by Floo powder that evening, after almost everyone else had left. His fiancée, Tana Hutchison, had greeted him with a hot dinner of ham, mashed potatoes, and roast chicken and butterbean casserole, and the two spent the evening together, trying desperately to fight back the emotional chill in the air with warm, delicious food. They knew there would be a lot to discuss, their fates, their employees' fates, their business's fate. But for now, they knew they both just needed each other, and a little bit of peace. It had been a pleasant evening. Even as Tana and Ramsay cleaned up and started stacking dishes into the sink, there was an air of docile normalcy that could make one forget, at least for a little while, how miserable and terrifying and uncertain the world was. As Tana washed the dishes and Ramsay dried, Ramsay kept trying to kiss Tana on the cheek and mouth. After the third time, Tana squirmed away, smirking playfully. Gordon, let me finish these, she said in tired amusement. I will after I get one more kiss, Ramsay replied cheekily. Tana splashed him with some water from the sink. Ramsay laughed. Their enjoyment was interrupted, however, when the doorbell rang. Tana stiffened slightly, her brows furrowing as her eyes darted to her wand on the counter, but Ramsay rested a hand on her shoulder gently and squeezed it before he walked out of the kitchen toward the front door. When he opened the door, however, he found nobody there. All he saw was a white Turkish Angora cat standing on his doormat, trembling all over and looking up at him with its grey eyes. Ramsay blinked, confused at the cat. Then, in less than 5 seconds, the cat had disappeared, to be replaced with a very skinny, deathly pale young man, dressed all in black with light blonde hair and terror in his eyes. "Hello, Professor," said Draco Malfoy. Chapter 60. Draco Turns. Chapter text. Ramsay at first was so stunned that he didn't move or say a word, merely staying stark, still in the doorway of his house. Then, when he recovered himself, his first thought was to grab his wand, but it was complicated by the fact that his and Tana's house was in a Muggle neighborhood. His eyes darted around, looking for any witnesses, and when he did so, Malfoy took the opportunity to speak again. "I'm not here to fight," he said very quickly, holding his hands up to show he wasn't armed. "Please." Ramsay's sharp blue eyes flared with both anxiety and anger as they darted from Malfoy to around at the quiet neighboring houses. "Not here to fight," he repeated coldly. "Then what are you here for? To deliver a message from you-know-who? I'm afraid I've never aligned myself with the Order, so you're at the wrong house." Malfoy seemed to shrink under Ramsay's gaze, almost like he was a turtle going back into its shell. No, the Dark Lord doesn't know I'm here. No one does, please." Ramsay's expression softened just enough to look confused. He had been angry to see Malfoy's face. Even if he had not mourned Dumbledore as everyone else had, it didn't change his outrage at seeing the student who had betrayed Hogwarts to the Death Eaters, and in doing so was partly responsible for what had ensued. I need help," Malfoy said very quietly. Ramsay frowned, his eyebrows coming tightly over his eyes. Malfoy continued very quickly, muttering frantically under his breath, as though terrified he wouldn't be able to get all of the words out. "Father, the Dark Lord sent Bellatrix and a few others to attack Azkaban, to try to get Yaxley and the others out. Only the attack failed. They only got 2 men out before the Auras arrived, Montmorency and my father. The Dark Lord was angry, very angry. Montmorency's magic isn't that strong, and my father, the Dark Lord, is still angry with him. He sent father on a mission to redeem himself, to deliver a death's head shell to the Muggle Prime Minister's office, in person." Ramsay gave a start. He hadn't heard that news. "I don't know what happened, but the shell went off too soon. Father had been holding it age. He was able to disapparate back home, but Malfoy's lip was trembling. The Dark Lord," he turned away, "refused to help him because father's failed him too many times. And Snape is away on another mission. He won't be back at headquarters until tomorrow." The mention of Snape was a knife in Ramsay's back and made him clench his jaw furiously. "No one else will help, since the Dark Lord won't. Mother's trying to heal him on her own, but nothing she does is working." Malfoy's face was as white as a sheet. He reached out a hand as if preparing to seize Ramsay's arm, but resisted the urge, which made him clutch at the air. You said that your offer still stood if I needed help," he said, his face alight with a kind of demented hope as his lips curled up in a weak half-smile. "You're the only person I could think of. Who might people say you're a prodigy at potions? You would know how to counter Death's Head acid. You want the help of a filthy mudblood?" Ramsay asked him, raising an eyebrow. Malfoy's grey eyes widened as his half-smile vanished. His face twitched like he was having a silent fit. If you're not going to help, then just say so," he bellowed, his voice shaking with fury and pain as it grew louder. Do you think this is easy for me to come here, after what I've done, to show my face to anyone, let alone you? You don't think I hate myself for what I've done, what I was unable to do? I was too cowardly to do the one thing that could have redeemed my father in the Dark Lord's eyes, and now because of my failure, the Dark Lord won't save him. Don't you think that I hate that the man I was assigned to kill, a man I've hated my whole life, for being a Muggle lover, actually tried to offer my family help? Mine. You don't think I hate that everything I was ever told about the Dark Lord, how he'd save the wizarding world from the mudbloods and blood traitors when he returned, bring it back to its former glory, that my father would help him do it, that it was an honor to be chosen, to join the Dark Lord and become one of his soldiers, become strong enough to rival Death himself, a Death Eater, that everything I ever thought I knew is wrong. Don't rub it in my face, you. His voice cracked. The suspicion in Ramsay's face flickered and died. He's really dying, the former professor whispered. Malfoy gave a weak nod. Please, he said, and it sounded like the words were physically injuring him. I'll do anything, just please save him. Ramsay suddenly became aware of Tana coming up alongside him. He turned to look at her over his shoulder as she took his hand. Her brown eyes were narrowed in concern, both for him and for the boy standing on their doorstep. She'd clearly heard every word. Finally, Ramsay gave a single, silent nod. With a sigh, Tana raised a wand. A moment later, a small black bag and a white purse had descended from downstairs and levitated themselves into her hands. Let's go, then, she said quietly. We don't have any time to lose. Draco had to use side-along apparition to bring Ramsay, and then Tana to Malfoy Manor, as he could not bring them both at the same time. It was remarkable how well he managed it, given his lack of interest in study the previous year. Ramsay suspected that the Malfoys might have given their son informal apparition classes at home. The three strode quickly and purposefully up the grounds, with the magical gate becoming as translucent as smoke with just a touch of Draco's hand. The front door of the manor opened just as instantly as soon as Draco stepped within a foot of it. I suppose the house has familial sensory enchantments, said Ramsay in mild interest. Draco nodded without looking at either of them. It responds to the three of us, father, mother, and me. Most everyone else would have to open them with magic. And I suppose you'd know as soon as they did, asked Tana. Unlike Ramsay, she kept her hand firmly on her wand inside her jean pocket. Draco nodded again, indicating the chandelier overhead. 3 candles were lit at the top, and 2 along the bottom edge. The top 3 green candles represent our family, explained Draco. The white ones on the lower levels light up for every additional person that comes through the manor gate. We have one on each floor of the house, so we always know when someone arrives or leaves. Draco. At that very moment, a scared voice of a woman echoed from somewhere upstairs. Mother, called Draco. I'm here, Mother, it's me. He dashed up the stairs, Ramsay and Tana at his heels. They passed several closed doors before reaching a room at the end of the hall that must have been the master bedroom. It was beautifully decorated like the rest of the house, with intricately carved dark wood furniture and extravagant dark blue draperies. But this one also held a lot of magical photographs, most of which held a much younger-looking Draco. Narcissa Malfoy was sitting beside the bed, where her husband was resting. The white silk linens had been trashed. They were covered in blood and yellowish-green acid that ate away at the seams. Lucius, Malfoy himself, looked even worse than the bed. Both of his arms from the elbow down were gone, and only bony remnants of his forearms remained. A large hole was eating its way through his left calf, and there was a terrible gash in his neck that was foaming yellow-green. Lucius was flushed, dead-eyed, and shaking violently despite being only semi-conscious. When Narcissa saw her son, she immediately ran forward, throwing her arms around him. Draco, what were you thinking leaving the house? You could have been, her words stilled in her throat when her eyes landed on Tana and Ramsay. You, she cried, her eyes narrowing on Ramsay fiercely. She whipped out her wand at once, pointing it at them. What are you doing in my house? Mother, Draco grabbed her arm. Mother, I brought them. What? Narcissa whispered, shocked. Professor Ramsay's good at potions, Draco said urgently. He glanced back at Ramsay over his shoulder anxiously. He said he'd help, did he? Narcissa spat, thoroughly unconvinced. What reason would he have to help Lucius to help us? Lucius gave a terrible, muffled yowl of pain that sounded like an animal getting shot. Narcissa immediately ran back over to her husband, her face very white and scared. I'm here, Lucius, she tried to soothe him desperately. She trailed her wand up and down the bones of his half their arm, trying to heal the damage, but they kept slowly dissolving despite her best efforts. Ramsay's eyes narrowed slightly as he came up alongside Narcissa, the black bag in one hand and his wand in the other. Accio, Dittany, he muttered. Once he had the bottle of Dittany in his hand, he put the bag down on the bed beside the wounded Lucius and began pouring a little bit of it onto the wound in Lucius's neck. What are you doing? Narcissa demanded, her face stricken. Dittany will help slow the damage, Ramsay said calmly. He turned to Draco. I could use some washcloths or handkerchiefs so we can apply this into the crevices. Draco nodded weakly and dashed from the room. Ramsay brought a hand up to Lucius's sweaty forehead to feel his temperature. He's on fire, he mumbled. 107 at least. Tana came over to Ramsay's side, materializing water in midair and then freezing it into ice cubes. Then, taking out a light blue handkerchief from her purse, she wrapped the ice up into a little bundle and started applying it to Lucius's sweaty forehead. The elder Malfoy gave a shudder in response, his eyes rolling up into his head as he gave a low moan. Ramsay looked up at Narcissa, who was shaking from head to toe in a kind of anger that was clearly fear in disguise. I won't lie to you, Narcissa, he said, keeping his voice level despite the urgency of the situation. Lucius is in very bad shape. If he'd gotten help when the acid first landed on him, then this would be a lot easier. We're going to have to apply Dittany to his wounds regularly for a good while, and even then, we may not be able to heal all of the damage. Our top priority will be the one on his neck. If his windpipe is severed, it'll be very hard to save him. Until then, we must keep his temperature down at all costs. The infection and fever can often kill long before the acid does, Narcissa watched, dumbfounded, as Ramsay applied some more Dittany to Lucius's neck. When Draco arrived with several pieces of cloth in hand, Ramsay took them from him and began to pour Dittany onto each of them. Tana, can you apply this one to his leg? Yes, said Tana with a firm nod, taking the cloth from her fiancé and started to dab at the hole eating through Lucius's calf. Narcissa, his arms. Ramsay offered a cloth to her. Narcissa stared at it, frozen. Narcissa, Ramsay said again, a little more urgently. Mother, said Draco, his voice much softer than Ramsay's but no less tense. Narcissa, still looking stunned, took the cloth from Ramsay and started to likewise dab at the edge of Lucius's right arm. Apply it every 30 seconds until the pain subsides, Ramsay murmured. We don't just want to halt the spread of damage, we want to repair what's been hurt. The three adults applied Dittany to Lucius's wounds for hours. It was exhausting and grueling work. Draco would have to regularly go fetch new pieces of cloth, whether towels, handkerchiefs, or even just pieces he'd torn out of the curtains, as the acid would melt through the Dittany-glazed fabric after a while. It didn't help how much Lucius was clearly suffering during the whole ordeal. Often he would cry out in disoriented pain, babbling fragmented words no one could understand. Despite how difficult it was for her, however, Narcissa kept her composure and kept applying Dittany to Lucius's wounds, even when tears would leak from her eyes and streak silently down her face. Gordon, it's no use, whispered Tana after 4 hours. The acid's taken away almost all of his knee. The flesh is all rotted. Ramsay looked down in dismay at the yellowish pus rippling out of the gash-like wound. Lucius's left leg was only held together by about a foot's worth of flesh and bone, and even that was burned and melted like bloody, sickening tar. We'll need to amputate, Tana said grimly. What? Cried Narcissa, looking horrified. It's the only way to save the rest of the leg, Tana said urgently. The infection will only get worse otherwise. It'll spread up and out if it's given the chance. You're right, Ramsay murmured. When Narcissa opened her mouth to argue, he cut her off. Tana has taught incoming healers for almost 5 years. I assure you, she wouldn't recommend this if it wasn't necessary. Narcissa looked helplessly from Ramsay to Tana. Then her eyes landed on Draco, who looked even whiter and more scared than she was, and she steadied her jaw. Very well, then, she said quietly. Tana turned to Ramsay. He'll need a sleeping draught. I'll brew one, said Ramsay. Take over his neck for me. Once Lucius was asleep, Tana instructed Narcissa to hold Lucius's leg still while she carefully applied the incisions. It was difficult for Ramsay to maintain the Dittany regiment while Tana and Narcissa worked. He literally had to apply cloth to multiple injuries at the same time, switching hands frequently. Finally, it got to the point that Draco picked up one of the Dittany-soaked curtain fragments himself and came up on his father's other side. I've got it, he said. Ramsay stared as Draco began to dab weakly at the end of his father's left arm. The poor boy looked nauseous and pale, as if it was taking all of his energy to keep himself from throwing up. Ramsay felt pity prickling at the sides of his heart. Draco, you don't, he started gently, but Draco glared fiercely at him. I've got it, he repeated. even though his voice was shaky with the effort of him trying to steady his stomach. Ramsay looked Draco in the eye for a long moment, but relented, returning to applying the dittany to Lucius's neck and right arm while Draco worked at Lucius's left arm. Her face very pale, Narcissa reached a hand over Lucius's frame and took her son's hand, squeezing it gently. Draco looked up at his mother, their two identically stoic faces trying and failing to contain the fear, grief, and uncertainty that they so wished they could hide. At long last, after almost 7 hours, Lucius's wounds were healed. By the end, he had lost almost all of his arms. His right leg from the knee down was gone, and there was an empty, jagged hole that cut through the side of his neck and collarbone. But he was alive, really, truly alive. And when he awoke and his grey eyes trailed over his wife and son's worried faces, Draco and Narcissa both immediately brought their arms around him and held him tightly, as tears started flooding from Lucius's eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured incoherently. "I'm sorry I failed, SHH, whispered Narcissa, bringing a hand through his long hair. "No, Lucius." "I failed the Dark Lord," mumbled Lucius. "I failed you." "No," Narcissa said again, a little more firmly despite her soft volume. "No, Lucius. You did everything you were expected to do. It's not your fault the shell went off too soon. You've never had to dirty your hands with garbage like that in the past. The Dark Lord knew that." Her eyes flared angrily as her voice became more venomous. "He knew that, yet he punished you for not being expert at it." Lucius tried to sit up, but found himself off kilter. He looked around at the room, noting the bloody and acid-ruined bed sheets before realizing what was missing. When he did, all of the color drained from his face. "The acid nearly killed you," Narcissa said quietly. "We saved what we could." Lucius looked at his wife, his face as pallid as a corpse and his grey eyes very wide. "We," he said shakily. Narcissa bit the side of her lip uncomfortably, glancing over her shoulder. Lucius followed her gaze, and for the first time laid eyes on Tana and Ramsay. Ramsay was wiping his hands clean of blood and dittany with a wet towel. "Morning, Lucius," said Ramsay levelly. Lucius's eyes narrowed sharply. How did you—" "I brought him, father," Draco interjected sharply. Lucius looked at his son in horror and disbelief. "He was the only one who could help you," Draco continued lowly, his eyes drawn down to the floor. "The Dark Lord sent Snape away, and I knew no one else would or could help, so I begged Ramsay to come. And he did, even though it could have been a trap, even though he didn't have time to tell anyone where he was going or why he still came." It sounded as though Draco was just as confused by all of this as Narcissa and Lucius were. Lucius and Narcissa both looked up at Ramsay, who was smiling slightly. "I may hate your beliefs, Lucius," the former professor said coolly, "and I may hate your loyalties. I may hate what you've done and how many people you've hurt. I may even hate you. But I do not hate your son, and your son clearly loves you more than anything. He came to my door for help because no one else could give it to him, and damn me if I'll ever turn away someone who sincerely needs my help." Lucius's eyes ran over Ramsay's face critically. "Admirable sentiment," he said coldly. "And what exactly do you expect to get in return for your charity, Ramsay?" Ramsay shrugged. "Charity with strings is not charity, though I would hope that Tana and I would be allowed to leave your house unharmed, considering we just saved your life." Lucius bared his teeth in something like a half-hearted sneer, but looked away, unable to respond. Narcissa brought a hand through his hair. "That is a boon we can spare," she said quietly. "Then we'll take our leave," said Ramsay, inclining his head in a respectful nod toward Narcissa. He turned to Tana and offered her his arm. She took it with a weak smile, brushing her brown hair from her eyes with her other hand. Ramsay then glanced at Draco. "To make sure we're clear," he said, "the offer I made is not a one-time favor. If you still need help, I can provide it. All you have to do is ask." Draco watched Ramsay and Tana stroll out the bedroom door, feeling a loss for words. They had just saved his father's life, no questions asked, and expected absolutely nothing in return. Hell, Ramsay was even offering more. And to a boy who had openly scorned him and who came from a family who considered people like him inferior. "I'll need to get some replacement limbs, as soon as possible," murmured Lucius. "Before the Dark Lord returns." Narcissa looked stricken. "Lucius, you cannot return to his service, not after what he's done to you." "Narcissa, our house is his headquarters," said Lucius. "I must. You nearly died. As long as I'm alive, I must serve." Lucius argued, though his voice wasn't passionate about the thought. When I was marked, that was the oath I made. Narcissa's eyes were burning with rage. Lucius, that man, that monster, was willing to stand back and watch you die. He marked your son and sent him on a mission to kill one of the most powerful wizards in the world. Yes, Lucius, Dumbledore was that. All while knowing Draco could never succeed. That so-called lord does not deserve your loyalty, our loyalty. Narcissa, please, whispered Lucius, his voice rough with anxiety. He couldn't take her hand, so he settled with bringing his head down on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. I know, my darling, he murmured, as Narcissa gave a quiet choke. I know you're frightened. I am too, but we don't have a choice. We cannot run from this, from him. Even if we tried, we would just end up like Igor Karkaroff, killed in some back alley in the dead of night, and being stumbled upon by perfect strangers post-mortem. We could never run far enough or hide well enough. As long as we're alive, we must serve. There was a silence. Then the Dark Lord must think you're dead. Lucius and Narcissa both looked up, shocked at Draco. His head was bowed and his eyes were in shadow. The Dark Lord expected you to die, said Draco quietly. It felt horrible to say it aloud, even if they all knew it was true. He said you'd failed him enough times, he's had enough. If you live, he'll just keep hurting you, hurting us in order to hurt you. If we hide you, if we say you're dead, then he'll get what he wants. He'll feel like he's won. Lucius looked horrified. Draco, you can't mean. Draco raised his head. His grey eyes were narrowed and blazing. In order to save all of us, father, he said solemnly, you must hide. Alone.